My name is Selena Dawson. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I thought the hardest part of losing my grandmother would be learning how to live in a world without her. I was wrong. The hardest part came after the funeral, after the tears, after the casseroles and sympathy cards and polite hugs from relatives who barely visited her when she was alive. The hardest part was realizing grief wasn't the only thing waiting for me after Evelyn Dawson died. The attorney closed the folder containing my grandmother's will and looked directly at me with an expression I still couldn't fully understand. "Before you celebrate," he said quietly, "pretend the money is gone." For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. The estate meeting had just ended. My parents were outside discussing dinner reservations with my older sister Vanessa. My boyfriend Ethan was waiting for me near the elevators, scrolling through his phone while giving me space to breathe after the emotionally exhausting meeting. Everything had already felt surreal enough. My grandmother had left her entire estate to me, not divided equally, not shared between siblings or family members. To me. Mr. Richard Hale waited until the office door clicked shut before speaking again. "Tell them you already spent the inheritance paying off a private debt," he said calmly. I stared at him. Why would I do that? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid the paperwork across the desk toward me. "It would be wise," he said. "Trust me." Then he walked away down the hallway before I could ask anything else. The conversation lasted maybe 40 seconds, but it followed me the entire drive home. Ethan noticed it immediately. "You've barely said a word since we left," he said softly as we stopped at a red light. I looked out the passenger window, watching rain slide down the glass in crooked lines. The lawyer said something strange to me. Ethan glanced over. "Strange how?" I repeated the warning. Instead of laughing, Ethan grew quiet. "That's oddly specific." Exactly. Neither of us spoke for a moment after that. The strange thing was, once the lawyer planted the idea in my mind, everything from the previous week started feeling different when I replayed it. My grandmother had died 9 days earlier. For the last 2 years, I'd been the one helping her most consistently. Grocery shopping, doctor appointments, fixing things around her house, sitting with her during long evenings when she didn't want to be alone. It never felt like an obligation. Evelyn Dawson had basically helped raise me after my parents spent most of my childhood working. She taught me how to cook, how to garden, how to survive heartbreak without becoming bitter. When my relationship with Ethan almost collapsed during a rough patch last year, she was the one who quietly told me, "Real love is peaceful, Selena. Confusion is usually a warning." I still heard her voice sometimes when the apartment got quiet. The rest of my family visited occasionally. Holidays mostly. Birthdays, if they remembered. But after the funeral, something shifted. My mother suddenly started calling every day, asking how I was coping emotionally. My father invited me to dinner twice in 1 week, which honestly hadn't happened in years. Vanessa began texting long, supportive messages filled with heart emojis and offers to help with anything. At first, I thought grief had brought everyone closer together. Now I wasn't so sure, especially because during the estate meeting, something deeply unsettling happened. When Mr. Hale announced that my grandmother had left the remaining assets entirely to me, nobody looked surprised. Not even slightly. My father nodded slowly, like he'd expected it all along. Vanessa smiled and said it made perfect sense because I'd spent the most time helping Grandma. My mother repeated 3 separate times that I deserved it. Nobody asked how much the inheritance actually was. Nobody reacted emotionally. They just watched me. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. That same evening, my parents insisted we all celebrate together at dinner.
Celebrate.
That was the exact word my father used. At the restaurant, Vanessa talked endlessly about how important family support was during difficult times. My father made several comments about how money should stay inside the family whenever possible. My mother nodded along to everything they said. I sat there, slowly realizing every conversation somehow circled back to the same subject without directly mentioning it. Family helping family. Family taking care of each other. Family building a future together. The lawyer's warning started echoing louder in my head with every passing minute. Before you celebrate, pretend the money is gone. I almost ignored it. Honestly, it sounded paranoid. But the next morning, my parents invited me to breakfast, and Vanessa said she'd probably stop by too. While driving there, I made a decision. I would test the lawyer's advice once. Just once. When we all sat around the kitchen table with coffee and eggs untouched in front of us, my father finally asked the question everyone had apparently been waiting to ask. "So, Selena," he said casually, "have you figured out what you're doing with the inheritance?" I took a sip of coffee. Then I changed the entire atmosphere in the room with one sentence. "Actually, the money's already gone."
Silence.
Not ordinary silence. The kind that feels like glass cracking somewhere deep beneath your feet. Vanessa blinked first. "Gone?" I nodded calmly. "I had an old debt I never talked about. I paid it off yesterday." My father immediately leaned forward. "What kind of debt?" The speed of the question startled me. I shrugged. "Personal." My mother frowned. "You never mentioned anything like that before." I didn't think I needed to. Vanessa stared at me carefully now. "How much was the debt?" "Most of it." Another silence. Only this time, the energy in the room changed so fast it was almost visible. 10 minutes earlier, my parents had been discussing future vacations and family opportunities. Now my father kept checking his phone. My mother suddenly became interested in refilling coffee nobody was drinking. Vanessa stopped smiling completely. Then my father asked quietly, "So there's nothing left?" "No," I said. "Not really." My mother sighed. "At least the debt is gone." But she didn't sound relieved. Not even close. Vanessa suddenly remembered she had plans helping a friend move boxes across town. She left less than 15 minutes later. Breakfast ended shortly after that. Nobody mentioned celebrating anymore. As I drove home, something inside me felt cold and painfully awake. Maybe the lawyer had been right. Maybe pretending the money was gone had revealed something people normally hide better. Still, part of me desperately wanted to believe I was imagining it. That afternoon, Vanessa called me. For one brief second, I thought maybe she wanted to apologize for rushing out earlier. Instead, she asked, "You didn't really spend the entire inheritance already, right?" I repeated the story. "It's gone." There was a pause before she laughed softly, but the sound felt forced and sharp around the edges. "That's honestly irresponsible, Selena." I didn't answer. She continued anyway. "You could have invested it. Grandma worked her whole life for that money." That was the exact moment something shifted permanently inside me, because the concern in her voice wasn't about my emotional well-being. It wasn't about stress or fear or debt. It was about the money itself. 2 hours later, my mother called, asking nearly the same question. "Are you absolutely certain the inheritance is gone?" "Yes." A long silence followed. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "Your father and I thought maybe we could help Vanessa start her business with some of it." I said nothing. "But if it's already spent," she sighed softly. "That's unfortunate."
Unfortunate.
That word stayed with me all evening. By nighttime, the constant attention from my family had completely disappeared. No texts, no invitations, no emotional check-ins, nothing. Ethan noticed before I even said anything. "They're quieter today," he said carefully, while sitting beside me on the couch. I laughed once without humor. "That's one way to describe it." He looked at me gently. "Selena, I don't think you're imagining this." Hearing someone else say it out loud somehow hurt worse. The next morning, things became even stranger. My father showed up outside my apartment unexpectedly, but he didn't come upstairs. He just stood beside his car, waiting for me to walk outside. "Selena," he said immediately, "we need to talk about some decisions you made." No hello. No hug. No asking how I was holding up after losing the woman who practically raised me. Just that. I asked what he meant. "The inheritance," he replied sharply. "You spent it all paying some debt." "Yes." He shook his head slowly, like a disappointed manager speaking to an incompetent employee. That wasn't very smart. I stared at him silently. For a second, it genuinely looked like he expected me to apologize. When I didn't, he continued. "Your mother and I were thinking about the future of this family. Vanessa's business could have benefited from some of that money." That surprised me more than anything else. "Grandma left it to me," I reminded him quietly. "Yes," he snapped back, "but we're still family." That word again. Family. Yesterday, they admired me for caring for my grandmother. Today, I was selfish for using what she left behind. My father kept talking. "You should have discussed it with us before making decisions like that." I asked one simple question. "For who?" He hesitated, then avoided answering directly. "Your sister is trying to build something important." Interesting. The years I spent helping Grandma were apparently less important than Vanessa's unfinished business plans. Eventually, my father checked his watch impatiently. "Anyway, what's done is done. Just make smarter choices moving forward." Then he got back into his car and drove away. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. But I stood there in the parking lot long after he left, feeling something heavy settling quietly inside my chest. Not grief. Not anger.
Clarity.
That afternoon, my mother called again. Her voice was colder this time, polished in the way people sound when they've rehearsed disappointment before dialing. "Selena, I just think you should understand that people might feel hurt." "Hurt?" "Disappointed," she corrected. I stood by my kitchen counter, staring at the rainwater still clinging to the window from the night before. "Disappointed about what?" "Your grandmother's money could have helped the family." I reminded her carefully. "Grandma left it to me." My mother sighed. "Yes, but people make emotional decisions when they're old and unwell." That sentence hit me harder than I expected.
Emotional decisions.
Like leaving something to the granddaughter who had sat beside her during chemo appointments. Like trusting the person who knew which blanket she liked when her legs ached. Like remembering who showed up when showing up was inconvenient. Over the next 2 days, the change became impossible to ignore. The cheerful messages stopped completely. My father didn't call unless it was to ask something practical. Vanessa vanished from my phone like I'd offended her simply by no longer being useful. My mother stopped inviting me over. By the 3rd day, it felt like I had quietly been removed from the family without anyone needing to say it. So I tested one more thing. I called Vanessa and asked if she wanted to meet for lunch. She hesitated just long enough to answer the real question before her words did. "I'm kind of busy lately." A week earlier, she'd been offering to help me clean Grandma's house, sort old photographs, even stay overnight if I didn't want to be alone. Now, she couldn't spare an hour. That evening, Ethan came over with takeout. Neither of us really ate. "She didn't even pretend well," I said. He leaned back against the couch, watching me gently. "Maybe she doesn't think she has to anymore." I hated how true that sounded. 2 days later, Mr. Hale messaged me. "Could you stop by my office tomorrow morning?" No explanation. No context. Just that. When I arrived, he wasn't surprised by the exhaustion on my face. He closed the door behind me, returned to his desk, and asked, "Your family started treating you differently, didn't they?" I nodded. Completely. He folded his hands. "So, according to them, the money is gone now?" "Yes." "Good." The word startled me. "Good?" Mr. Hale leaned back slowly. "Your grandmother asked me to do something unusual a few months before she passed." My throat tightened. She knew? She suspected. He opened a folder and slid a document toward me, though I couldn't bring myself to read it yet. Evelyn was thinking very carefully about what would happen after she died. Not just legally, emotionally. I sat perfectly still. She noticed certain family members had become more attentive during the final year of her life, he continued. More visits, more phone calls, more sudden concern. I remembered it then. Vanessa arriving with flowers but checking cabinets when Grandma went to the bathroom. My father asking vague questions about whether Grandma still owned the lake property. My mother complimenting old jewelry she'd never noticed before. At the time, I told myself I was being unfair. Mr. Hale tapped the folder. "Your grandmother believed that once people knew you inherited the estate, they might begin treating you based on what they hoped to gain from you. So she told you to warn me?" "Yes," he said, "but that wasn't all." He explained that legally, the inheritance had already been assigned to me, but the assets themselves would not transfer for 30 days. Protected accounts. Delayed release. Instructions my grandmother had written with absolute precision. She insisted on the delay, he said. "Why?" "So you would have time to observe people before the money reached your hands." The room felt colder. Mr. Hale's voice softened. Her words were, "If they believe the money is gone and still love Selena the same way, then they deserve to remain close to her. If not, she needs to know before they can pressure her." I looked down at my hands. For a moment, all I could think about was Grandma sitting in this same office, sick and tired and still worrying about protecting me. Mr. Hale turned another page. "There is something else." I looked up. "The inheritance is larger than what your family probably imagines." "How much larger?" He told me. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. It wasn't just cash. There were investment accounts, 2 properties, mineral rights attached to one of them, and a trust she had quietly built over decades. Several $1,000,000. The number felt unreal, almost meaningless at first, too large to attach to grocery runs and hospital chairs and the small yellow house where Grandma taught me to make cinnamon rolls. "She wanted you secure," Mr. Hale said. "But more than that, she wanted you protected." I swallowed hard. Did she expect my family to react like this? He didn't hesitate. "Yes." That answer sat heavily between us. Then he added, "Your father called me yesterday." My stomach tightened. "What?" "He asked whether the estate could be reviewed again. He suggested you may have misunderstood the inheritance." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the pattern was becoming too clear to deny. Mr. Hale studied me for a moment. "They still believe the money is gone?" "Yes." Keep it that way for now. 3 days after that meeting, my mother invited me to dinner. Her message was short. Your father and Vanessa will be here tonight. You should come. No warmth. No, we miss you. No mention of Grandma. Just dinner. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. When I arrived, the house felt different immediately. Not openly hostile. Worse.
Distant.
My father sat at the table scrolling through his phone. Vanessa leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. My mother was stirring something on the stove with too much attention. No one hugged me. We sat down, and for a while, everyone pretended the evening was normal. Vanessa mentioned someone she knew moving to Arizona. My mother talked about a neighbor's fence. My father complained about gas prices. Then he finally set his fork down. Selena, I've been thinking about what you told us regarding the debt. I nodded. I spoke with a financial advisor yesterday, he said. Sometimes there are ways to recover money if debts were paid improperly. I stared at him. Recover money? If the lender pressured you, he said quickly, or if the terms were unfair. Vanessa jumped in. Or if the contract wasn't valid. That was when I realized they had already discussed this before I arrived. I said, the loan was legitimate. It's closed. My father's jaw tightened. That's unfortunate. Vanessa pushed her plate aside. Honestly, Selena, it still doesn't make sense. You never mentioned this debt before. I kept it private. Well, she snapped, it affected the whole family. The whole family. Those 3 words almost made me laugh. My mother finally spoke, softer than the others, which somehow made it worse. We're not criticizing you. We just think your grandmother would have wanted the money to help everyone. There it was again. Grandma's wishes being rewritten by people who hadn't known her daily routine, her fears, her favorite tea, or the way she gripped my hand when she was too tired to speak. The rest of dinner passed quietly. When I stood to leave, Vanessa followed me to the door. The porch light flickered above us. She crossed her arms and said, I hope you realize this changes things. What does? You made a selfish decision.
Selfish.
I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw no grief in her face, only resentment. I didn't argue. I just said, Good night, Vanessa. On the drive home, I thought about every sudden kindness after the funeral, every invitation, every careful question, every sentence dressed up as concern but built around money. Mr. Hale had been right. Grandma had been right. Pretending the money was gone had revealed everything. But there were still 23 days before the inheritance officially transferred. And when my family eventually learned the truth, I already knew one thing. Their reaction would tell me even more. The next 23 days passed quietly. Too quietly. That was the strange thing about realizing people only loved the version of you connected to opportunity. Once they believed there was nothing left to gain, the silence came easily to them. My parents stopped inviting me over entirely. Vanessa disappeared unless she needed information about extended family events. Even then, her messages were cold and painfully short. Hope your week is fine. Aunt Melissa changed the reunion date. That was it. No warmth, no curiosity about how I was handling the loss of the woman who had practically raised me. The affection had evaporated so fast, it almost felt rehearsed. Meanwhile, I met with Mr. Hale twice more. He walked me through the inheritance carefully, explaining account structures, property taxes, investments, and legal protections my grandmother had arranged years earlier. But the legal conversations weren't what stayed with me most. It was the stories. Apparently, during the final months of her illness, Grandma had started noticing things I never fully allowed myself to see. She worried about you, Mr. Hale told me during one meeting. She worried about everyone after she died, I replied quietly. He shook his head. No, specifically you. That surprised me. Mr. Hale opened another folder and handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. Selena. Just seeing it nearly broke me. I waited until I got home to open it. Ethan sat beside me on the couch while I unfolded the letter carefully with trembling fingers. My sweet girl. If you are reading this, then Richard followed my instructions properly, which means you now know something painful about people. I hope not everyone disappointed you. But if they did, please remember this is not your fault. You spent years loving people honestly. Never be ashamed of that. The world tries very hard to convince kind women that boundaries are cruelty. They are not. I know you will try to excuse everyone's behavior. You always do. But love that only appears around money is not love, Selena. And guilt is not the same thing as family. I had to stop reading for a moment because my vision blurred completely. Ethan quietly took my hand. She knew you too well, he said softly. Yes, she really did. Over the following week, something else became painfully obvious. Nobody from my family asked how I was emotionally handling the inheritance itself. Not once. Not the pressure. Not the grief. Not the responsibility. Only the money surrounding it. Then, on the 30th day, everything officially transferred. The accounts became mine. The properties legally transferred into my name. It was done. That same evening, my mother called. Selena, she said warmly, almost too warmly. We're having dinner Sunday. You should come. The shift in tone was immediate and obvious. And I knew exactly why. A few days earlier, Mr. Hale had informed me that my father contacted his office again, asking questions about finalized transfers and account releases. They were starting to suspect the truth. Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house with a strange calmness sitting inside my chest. Not fear. Not anger.
Certainty.
The atmosphere felt noticeably different the moment I walked inside. My father greeted me at the door personally. My mother hugged me for the first time in weeks. Vanessa smiled when I entered the dining room. It almost would have felt comforting if it hadn't been so artificial. Dinner lasted about 20 minutes before my father finally said what everyone had been circling around. Selena, he began carefully, I spoke with the attorney recently. I looked up from my plate. He mentioned the estate paperwork finalized this week. That's true. My father watched my face closely. So the inheritance officially transferred to you now? Yes. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. So about that debt. There it was. I set my glass down carefully before answering. There was never a debt.
Silence. Immediate.
Heavy. My father blinked at me. What? Why? I lied, I said calmly. There was never a loan. My mother stared at me in confusion. Why would you say something like that? Because Mr. Hale warned me something interesting might happen if people believed the inheritance was gone. Nobody moved. Vanessa's expression hardened first. So this was some kind of test? Yes. The room changed instantly. Not guilt. Not embarrassment. Anger. My father leaned back sharply in his chair. That's unbelievable. It wasn't meant to be funny. You lied to your own family, he snapped. I looked directly at him. And you all treated me differently the second you thought there was nothing to gain from me. Nobody denied it. That was the most revealing part. My mother recovered first. "We were hurt," she said quietly. "No," I answered. "You were disappointed." Her face tightened. Vanessa stood abruptly from her chair. "This is insane, Selena. You manipulated everyone." I almost laughed at that. "Manipulated?" I repeated softly. "Vanessa, you stopped speaking to me because you thought the money was gone." "That's not true." "Then why did you suddenly become too busy for lunch? Why did nobody call? Why did Dad suddenly think I was irresponsible?" My father's jaw tightened. "You embarrassed this family." "No," I said calmly. "I exposed something uncomfortable." The silence afterward felt suffocating. Finally, my mother asked the question she actually cared about most. "So what happens with the inheritance now?" There it was. Even now. Even after all of this. Still the inheritance. I slowly stood from the table. "Now," I said quietly, "I live my life." Vanessa crossed her arms angrily. "So that's it? You're just walking away?" I looked at her carefully. "I spent 2 years taking care of Grandma while everyone else visited on holidays. Not once did I complain. Not once did I ask for recognition. But the second you thought there was no money attached to me anymore, all of you disappeared." Nobody spoke. Because nobody could. I continued before anyone could interrupt. "The saddest part is that Grandma knew this would happen before I did." That finally seemed to hit them. Not the money. Not the argument. The fact that Evelyn Dawson herself expected this outcome. My father looked genuinely shaken for the first time all evening. "You talked to her about us?" "I didn't have to," I said softly. "She already saw it herself." I grabbed my coat from the chair near the door. Behind me, my mother's voice cracked slightly. "Selena, families make mistakes." I paused, then turned back one last time. "Mistakes are accidental," I said quietly. This wasn't. And then I walked out. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa immediately starting another argument with my parents, her voice sharp and angry through the walls. But I didn't stay to listen. For the first time in weeks, the air outside felt easier to breathe. When I reached my car, my phone vibrated. A message from Ethan. "How did it go?" I stared at the screen for a second before replying. I finally saw everyone clearly. A few minutes later, another message appeared. "Then maybe your grandmother's plan worked exactly the way she hoped." I sat there in silence after reading that, because deep down, I knew he was right. The strange part wasn't the fight at dinner. It was what happened afterward. Within 3 days, my phone suddenly became active again. My mother sent me recipes she thought I'd like. My father asked if I wanted to come by for coffee sometime. Vanessa texted me links to business articles, followed by messages pretending nothing uncomfortable had happened. "Hope you're doing well. Saw this and thought of you. We should talk soon." The sudden warmth would have confused me a month earlier. Now it just made me tired. Because once you notice conditional love, you start seeing it everywhere. Ethan noticed the change in me almost immediately. "You're quieter," he said one evening while we walked through one of the properties Grandma had left me. It was a small lake house about 40 minutes outside the city. The place needed repairs, but Grandma had loved it. You could still smell cedar wood and old books inside. "I think I'm just done arguing," I admitted. He slipped his hand into mine gently. "That's not weakness, Selena." We walked through the empty living room slowly, while evening sunlight stretched across the wooden floors. For the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful. Not happy exactly, but lighter. The inheritance still didn't feel entirely real to me, Sometimes I'd wake up forgetting everything had changed until I saw legal documents stacked across my dining table. But the emotional clarity felt real. Painfully real. Over the next 2 weeks, Vanessa became increasingly persistent. At first, she tried friendliness, then guilt, then nostalgia. One night, she called unexpectedly. "I feel like we've drifted apart," she said softly. I almost admired how carefully she performed concern now. "We have," I answered. There was a pause. "You know I love you, right?" I leaned back against my couch silently. Then she finally arrived at the real reason for the call. "I've actually been working on a new business proposal," she said casually. "And honestly, with your investment, it could become something huge." There it was. Always, eventually, there. I closed my eyes briefly. "Vanessa." "What?" "You didn't speak to me for almost a month. That's not fair." "It is fair." She exhaled sharply into the phone. "You're acting like we're horrible people over one misunderstanding." "No," I said quietly. "I'm reacting to how fast everyone stopped caring when they thought there was nothing left to gain." Her voice hardened instantly. "So you're really going to hold this over everyone forever?" That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Not remorse. Not reflection. Just frustration that consequences existed. A few days later, my mother tried a different approach. She invited me to lunch alone. For a brief moment, I considered refusing, but part of me still missed who I thought she was before all of this. We met at a small cafe downtown. At first, the conversation stayed harmless. Weather, family friends, Ethan. Then eventually, she sighed and reached across the table. "Families have to forgive each other, Selena." I looked at her quietly. "Forgiveness usually starts with accountability." Her expression tightened slightly. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I almost laughed. "Mom, you all disappeared from my life because you thought the inheritance was gone." "That's not true." "Then why did everything change overnight?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she stirred her coffee and said something softer. "Your father feels embarrassed." That surprised me. "Embarrassed?" "He thinks you humiliated him." I stared at her for several seconds. Not because the statement shocked me, because it didn't. Even now, the focus wasn't on how deeply they hurt me. It was about how uncomfortable the truth made them feel. My mother reached for my hand again. "You know your father loves you." I thought about that carefully before answering. "I think he loves the version of me that doesn't challenge him." For the first time during lunch, she looked genuinely hurt. But I also realized something important in that moment. Feeling guilty about hurting someone is not the same thing as changing. When lunch ended, my mother hugged me tightly before leaving. The old version of me would have cried afterward. Instead, I sat alone at the table for several minutes, feeling strangely calm. That night, I reread Grandma's letter again, especially one sentence. "The world tries very hard to convince kind women that boundaries are cruelty." I finally understood what she meant. For most of my life, I confused self-sacrifice with love. I believed keeping peace was the same thing as protecting relationships. But real relationships survive honesty. Only transactional ones collapse when benefits disappear. A week later, Ethan and I drove back to the lake house, carrying paint samples and notebooks filled with renovation ideas. "You really want to keep this place?" he asked while opening windows to let fresh air inside. "Yes," I said immediately. The truth was, it felt like the only place untouched by manipulation. Grandma's presence still lived there quietly. In the old piano near the fireplace, in the handwritten recipes tucked inside kitchen drawers. in the faded blanket folded carefully over the couch. Ethan smiled while looking around the room. "You know," he said, "I can actually picture us here." Us. That word settled warmly inside my chest. Not because it sounded romantic, because it sounded safe, peaceful, real. I walked onto the back porch and looked out across the lake, while evening light reflected across the water in soft gold lines. For weeks, I thought the inheritance story was about money. But standing there, I realized Grandma's real gift had been clarity. She knew exactly what would happen once people believed I had something valuable. And she wanted me to see it before guilt trapped me into sharing pieces of myself with people who only returned affection when rewards existed. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Vanessa. "I miss how things used to be." I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking it without answering. Because the truth was, I missed who I thought my family was, too. But once someone reveals themselves clearly, you can't unknow it. And maybe that was the hardest lesson Grandma ever taught me. Not everyone who calls you family truly knows how to love without conditions. But the people who do, they remain exactly the same, whether you have everything or nothing. I looked back at Ethan standing inside the house, smiling, while dust covered his shirt sleeves. Then I looked out at the lake again. For the first time since Grandma died, I felt something besides grief. I felt free. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life, I thought surviving meant staying quiet. Keeping the peace. Smiling through insults. Pretending cruel words didn't leave bruises just because they came from family. I learned that lesson young, especially after I became a mother to Noah. Noah was 8 years old when I married Daniel Hayes, the man who changed everything. And my wedding day was the day my entire family finally showed me exactly who they really were. It happened so fast. 1 second, the ballroom looked perfect. Soft, golden lights hung from the ceiling like floating candles. Noah kept adjusting his little navy blue tie because he wanted to look grown up for the wedding photos. Daniel's cousins were laughing near the champagne tower. Music drifted softly across the room, while servers carried trays of tiny desserts. For a moment, I actually believed we were happy. Noah had been excited about the wedding for months. He helped me choose songs for the ceremony. He practiced walking down the aisle in the hallway at home. 3 nights before the wedding, he crawled into my lap while I was stuffing invitations into keepsake boxes and whispered, "After today, can I call Daniel Dad?" I almost cried right there. Because Daniel never treated Noah like someone else's child. He treated him like his son. That mattered more than I could explain. Especially because my family spent years making Noah feel like he didn't belong anywhere near them. My mother, Linda Parker, never said it directly at first. She preferred subtle cruelty, the kind that could be denied later. "Oh, he's energetic." "He's a lot." "You're still young, Emily. A man without baggage could have given you an easier life." My older sister Megan was worse because she didn't even pretend to hide it. She once looked me dead in the eye and said, "No decent man wants to raise another guy's kid." My younger brother Tyler used to joke that Noah was collateral damage from my failed relationship. And every single time, I stayed quiet. I told myself they didn't mean it. I told myself family was complicated. I told myself Noah was too young to notice. I was wrong about that last part. Children notice everything, especially rejection. At the reception, Noah stood near the guest tables holding a little plastic cup of orange juice. He was smiling so hard his cheeks looked pink. He waved toward my mother. and she looked him up and down with complete disgust before saying loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Let's not pretend he's really part of this family." The room didn't stop. Music still played. People still talked. But for me, everything went silent. Megan rolled her eyes dramatically beside her wine glass. Tyler muttered, "This wedding is honestly embarrassing." My father, Robert, didn't say a word, which somehow hurt even worse. I looked at Noah, just in time to watch the happiness disappear from his face. It was physical. His little shoulders dropped. His hand slowly lowered. His eyes moved to the floor, like he suddenly wanted to disappear. He sat down quietly without touching his snacks. No crying. No tantrum. That made it worse. Because no 8-year-old should know how to hide heartbreak that well. Across the room, Daniel saw it happen too. He'd been talking to one of his cousins with a champagne glass in his hand, while the best man prepared to start the wedding toast. I thought maybe Daniel would ignore it. That's what I would have done. Ignore it. Smile politely. Pretend everything was fine until we got home. That's what my family trained me to do my whole life. But Daniel wasn't built like me. Thank God for that. Before the best man could even reach the microphone, Daniel stepped forward. The room slowly quieted as he raised his glass. But he wasn't smiling. Not even a little. He looked directly at my parents' table. Then he said, "I wasn't planning to do this tonight, but after hearing what was said about Noah, I think something needs to be very clear." Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. Daniel's voice stayed calm, but somehow that made it more powerful. "From today forward, Noah is my son. I don't care whose blood runs through who. Family is about who protects each other, who shows up, and who loves without conditions." I saw my mother stiffen immediately. Daniel continued, "And what I see right now are grown adults bullying a child while expecting to still be treated like family." The silence that followed felt violent. Even the servers stopped moving. Daniel looked at Noah, then softened completely. "You belong here more than anyone who tried to make you feel unwanted." Noah stared at him like he couldn't believe someone finally said it out loud. Then chaos exploded. My mother stood so fast, her chair scraped loudly across the floor. "How dare you speak to us like that?" she snapped. My father started yelling about disrespect. Megan burst into dramatic tears like she was somehow the victim. Tyler threw his napkin onto the table, muttering, "Unbelievable." And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to calm them down. I didn't apologize. I didn't smooth things over. I stood up beside Daniel. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out, but somehow my voice came out steady. "You need to leave." My mother blinked at me like she genuinely didn't understand the words. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "Leave." "Emily Parker," she hissed, using my full name like she used to when I was a child. But something inside me had finally snapped. "You don't get to humiliate my son at my wedding and stay here pretending to celebrate us." Megan pointed at Daniel accusingly. "You're seriously choosing a man over your own family?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm choosing the people who actually love me." That shut her up for exactly 2 seconds. Then everyone started yelling again. Tyler slammed his fist against the table. My father demanded respect. My mother kept repeating that they raised me, as if basic parenting erased years of emotional cruelty. But none of it mattered anymore. Because Noah was sitting there trying not to cry on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, I watched my family walk out of my wedding, screaming the entire way. And honestly, The room felt lighter after they left. Daniel immediately crossed the room and knelt beside Noah. Noah looked terrified, like somehow this was all his fault. His tiny voice cracked when he asked, "Did I ruin everything?" Daniel didn't hesitate. He smiled softly and said, "No, kiddo. You made this day perfect." Then he pulled Noah into a hug and whispered, "We're finally free." And for the first time all night, Noah smiled again. 3 weeks passed after the wedding before my mother showed up at our house. Not a single apology came first. No call. No text. No acknowledgement of the humiliation they put Noah through. Just silence. Honestly, part of me expected it. My family had always treated conflict like weather. Ignore it long enough, and eventually, everyone would pretend the storm never happened. Daniel and I took Noah on a small weekend trip after the wedding. Nothing expensive, just a quiet cabin near a lake where Noah spent hours skipping rocks and trying to teach Daniel how to catch fish, even though neither of them knew what they were doing. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. I should have known it wouldn't last. That Tuesday morning, I opened the front door expecting a delivery package. Instead, my mother stood there holding her purse under one arm like she was stopping by for coffee. No shame. No hesitation. She walked past me before I could even process what was happening. Noah was sitting in the living room coloring at the coffee table. The second he saw her, his expression changed instantly. He quietly set his markers down, stood up, and disappeared into his bedroom without saying a word. That destroyed me more than if he'd cried. Because children only move that carefully around people they're afraid of. My mother didn't even look at him. She walked straight into my kitchen, opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of water, and casually said, "Your father and I need a new car. The old one's too small." I honestly thought I misheard her. Not, "How's Noah?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Can we talk about what happened?" Just money. I stared at her while she twisted open the bottle cap like nothing had changed. Then she added, "And Megan's tuition payment is due next week, so don't forget that." I felt something cold settle inside me, because suddenly everything became painfully clear. The wedding wasn't the real issue for her. Losing control over me was. I crossed my arms slowly. "Why are you here?" She sighed dramatically. "Emily, don't start." "No, answer the question." She rolled her eyes exactly the way Megan did. "We all got emotional at the wedding. It happened. Move on already before you ruin your marriage holding grudges." That word.
Emotional.
Like she hadn't looked an 8-year-old boy directly in the face and told him he didn't belong. Like my siblings hadn't joined in. Like Noah hadn't spent 2 nights afterward asking Daniel if he should stop calling him Dad because maybe it upset people. I felt rage crawl slowly up my spine. "You don't get to walk in here asking for money after what you did to Noah." "Oh, for God's sake," she snapped. "He's a child. He's already over it." No, he wasn't. He just learned early that crying around my family never changed anything. I looked her directly in the eyes. "I'm done." She blinked. "Done with what?" "All of it." Her face hardened immediately. I continued before I lost my nerve. "I'm not paying Megan's tuition anymore. I'm not covering Tyler's rent. I'm not helping with the mortgage. I'm done financing this family." Silence. Complete silence. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. "You're bluffing." "I'm not." "You wouldn't do this to your own family." The irony almost made me dizzy. My own family. The people who spent years reminding me Noah wasn't really theirs. The people who treated my son like a stain on their reputation. I walked to the front door and opened it. "You need to leave." This time, she didn't move immediately. I think she was waiting for me to crack first, like I always used to. But I didn't. Finally, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Right before leaving, she turned around with pure venom in her voice. "You're choosing some man and a child that isn't even his over the people who raised you." And something inside me finally stopped hurting. Because for the first time, I realized she truly believed that sentence made her right. I looked at her calmly. "No," I said. "I'm choosing respect. Something you never gave me, and you definitely never gave Noah." Then I shut the door in her face. That night, I found Noah sitting on his bed, holding one of the wedding photos. It was a picture of him and Daniel, laughing together near the dance floor. Noah traced the edge of the photo carefully before asking, "Grandma hates me, doesn't she?" My chest physically hurt hearing that. I sat beside him and brushed his hair back gently. "No, baby," I whispered. "She's angry because we stopped letting her hurt us." He looked down quietly. Then after a long pause, he asked, "Do you think she'll ever be nice to me?" I wanted to lie. God, I wanted to lie so badly. But Daniel always told me children deserved honesty, delivered gently. So I kissed Noah's forehead and said, "I don't know. But none of this is your fault." Later that night, Daniel wrapped his arms around me in the kitchen while I cried quietly into his shirt. He whispered something I never forgot. This is probably the first time in her life she realizes she can't control you anymore. And honestly, that terrified her more than losing me. A week later, Megan texted me. First message since the wedding. She sent a photo of our childhood backyard with the caption, "Family dinner Friday night. You should come. Bring the boy." The boy. Not Noah. Not your son. Just the boy. Daniel immediately told me not to go. "It feels wrong," he said. "Like they're setting something up." He probably would have been right if I'd listened. But some pathetic little piece of me still hoped maybe guilt finally reached them. So Friday night, I went alone. I didn't bring Noah. And honestly, he didn't even seem disappointed. That should have told me everything. When I arrived, the front door was already open. No music. No smell of food cooking. No warmth. My father sat stiffly on the couch, watching television with the volume muted. Megan stood in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for a dentist appointment instead of a family dinner. Tyler arrived 15 minutes late, looking annoyed to even be there. Then my mother appeared from the hallway. First thing she asked was, "Where's Noah?" "Home." She frowned immediately. "You're still doing this dramatic protection thing?" I ignored her and sat down. Something about the atmosphere felt rehearsed. Cold. Like everyone already knew their lines. Turns out, I was right. Megan started first. "We're worried about you, Emily." Tyler nodded. "You've changed a lot since marrying Daniel." I almost laughed at that. Changed. Meaning, I stopped tolerating abuse quietly. My father finally spoke. "Cutting off your family over one argument isn't healthy." One argument. That's how they reduced humiliating a child publicly. Then, my mother slid a folder across the table. I stared at it. "What's this?" "We made things easier," she said casually. "A financial agreement." I opened it slowly. My stomach dropped immediately. Payment breakdowns.
Tuition.
Mortgage contributions. Tyler's rent. Monthly transfers. Everything typed neatly, like some corporate contract. Like I was an employee. Or worse.
An account balance.
My mother folded her hands calmly. You're married now. You and Daniel both work. This creates structure. Tyler leaned back smugly. It's fair.
Fair.
I looked around the table. Are any of you going to apologize for what happened at the wedding?
Silence.
Then my father sighed impatiently. We don't need to keep revisiting that. That was the moment everything clicked. This wasn't reconciliation. It was an ambush. A performance designed to pressure me back into obedience. My mother crossed her arms. You're seriously throwing away your real family over a child you barely raised alone for 5 years before Daniel showed up? That sentence hit harder than screaming ever could, because it exposed exactly how little they valued Noah, how little they valued me. I stood up, slowly. Megan groaned dramatically. Oh my God, Emily, stop acting crazy.
Crazy.
Another favorite family word. Any emotion they couldn't control became crazy. I picked up the contract calmly, then tore it directly down the middle. The sound echoed through the dining room. You don't want a daughter, I said quietly. You want a bank. Tyler stood up immediately. You ungrateful! No, I snapped. You don't get to talk anymore. The room went dead silent. Even my mother looked shocked, because I had never spoken to them like that before. Not once in my entire life. I dropped the ripped papers onto the table. I'm done pretending this family is built on love. Then I walked out. 2 days later, my father called Daniel at work, and that's when things became truly dangerous. Daniel didn't tell me about the meeting right away. At first, I thought he was just protecting my peace. Later, I realized he needed time to fully understand how deep my family's manipulation actually went before bringing it to me. My father called him pretending to be reasonable. Said he wanted to talk man to man. Said the family was worried about me. Worried. That word almost makes me laugh now. According to them, protecting my son meant I was unstable. Setting boundaries meant I was emotional. Refusing to finance grown adults meant I was selfish. Daniel agreed to meet them anyway, not because he trusted them, because he wanted to hear exactly how far they'd go. They met at a cafe near my parents' neighborhood. All 4 of them showed up. My mother, my father, Megan, Tyler. Daniel told me later there wasn't even food on the table, just coffee cups and forced smiles. No one wasted time pretending. My father started first. Emily's been under pressure ever since Noah was born. Daniel stayed quiet. Then Megan leaned forward dramatically. She isolates herself when she gets emotional. Tyler added, she doesn't know how to separate reality from family drama.
Reality.
As if humiliating a child publicly was imaginary. Daniel said they spent nearly 20 minutes painting me as unstable.
Difficult. Manipulative. Overly sensitive.
Then, finally, my mother said what they were really thinking. You're a good man, Daniel, but you married into a complicated situation.
Complicated.
That's the word people use when they want to insult someone without sounding cruel. Tyler stirred his coffee before casually adding, You care about Noah, we get it. But honestly, he's not your responsibility. Daniel told me that was the moment he understood something important. They genuinely believed every relationship was transactional. That love had limits, conditions, expiration dates. Because that's how they loved. Then my father said quietly, You still have time to think carefully about your future. Meaning me. Meaning Noah. Meaning our family. Daniel listened to every single word without interrupting them, and then he destroyed all of them.
Calmly. Completely.
He leaned back in his chair and looked directly at my father. "You know what's funny?" he said quietly. "I already knew about the second mortgage under Emily's name."
Silence.
Total silence. My mother froze. Tyler stopped moving completely. Daniel continued. "And the forged signature on Tyler's business loan." Megan's face went white instantly. "And the money pulled from the education account Emily thought was closed." No one spoke. Daniel said you could actually feel panic settling over the table, because suddenly they realized they weren't controlling the conversation anymore. My father tried recovering first. "It's more complicated than that." "No," Daniel said calmly. "It's theft." My mother attempted a shaky smile. "Emily was helping the family voluntarily." Daniel shook his head once. "She didn't even know what you were doing." Then he pulled a USB drive from his pocket and dropped it onto the table. The sound apparently made Tyler jump. "Everything's on there," Daniel said. "Transactions, signatures, account activity." No one touched it. Daniel stood slowly. "I could have gone to the police already." My mother looked horrified. "But I wanted to see whether any of you were capable of telling the truth first." They weren't. Of course they weren't. Daniel said my father looked smaller somehow after that. Like all his authority depended entirely on nobody questioning him. Before leaving, Daniel looked directly at my mother and said something I'll never forget. "You spent years convincing Emily she owed you for loving her." Then he walked away. When he came home that night, he handed me the USB drive without saying anything at first. I sat at the kitchen table while Noah slept upstairs and stared at it like it might explode. "What is this?" I whispered. Daniel sat beside me slowly. "The truth." I wish I could say I was shocked by everything on that drive, but honestly, part of me wasn't. Because deep down, I always knew something felt wrong. I just spent years training myself not to question it. The files were endless. Bank statements, loan approvals, forged signatures,
Transfer records.
hidden accounts. My name appeared everywhere. A second mortgage tied to my credit. Tyler's failed business loan connected to my identity. Tuition payments for Megan, taken from accounts I thought were inactive. Then I found the worst one. An education fund I opened years earlier for Noah. Money missing. Not thousands. Tens of thousands. I physically stopped breathing for a second. Daniel grabbed my hand immediately. I remember whispering, "They stole from Noah." Not from me. From him. That somehow hurt worse. The room felt cold suddenly, like my entire childhood was rearranging itself in my mind. Every guilt trip, every lecture about family loyalty, every moment I was told I was selfish for hesitating to help financially. None of it came from love. It came from entitlement.
Control.
My mother telling relatives I offered help while secretly draining accounts behind my back. My father acting helpless whenever bills appeared. Megan constantly reminding me how lucky I was to still have family support as a single mother. Tyler borrowing money he never intended to repay. They built an entire system around my obedience. And I let them. That realization hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. I spent 2 full days reviewing every document. I barely slept. I barely ate. Daniel never pressured me once. He simply stayed beside me, sometimes silently refilling my coffee, sometimes rubbing circles against my back when I stopped talking completely. By the second night, something inside me changed. The sadness burned away first, then guilt, then fear. What remained felt colder.
Sharper. Clarity.
I stopped wanting their approval. That was the real turning point. Not anger.
Freedom.
So I sent one message to the family group chat we hadn't used since the wedding. Dinner at my house Friday, 7 p.m. Don't be late. That was it. No explanation. No emotion. No room for manipulation. Megan replied immediately, asking what this was about. I ignored her. Friday night arrived. Daniel stayed upstairs with Noah because I asked him to. This needed to happen without distractions. I cooked dinner like everything was normal. Pasta. Garlic bread. Wine on the table. The performance almost amused me. My family arrived together, looking nervous, for the first time in my life. Tyler tried acting casual, but he wouldn't stop tapping his fingers against his leg. Megan kept checking my face like she was searching for weakness. My father looked exhausted. Only my mother still carried herself with forced confidence. But even she seemed uncertain. We sat down quietly. No one touched the food. I slid 4 folders across the table, one for each of them. My mother stared at hers immediately. Tyler opened his first and visibly paled. Megan whispered, "What the hell is this?" Evidence. Highlighted signatures. Transaction histories. Account records. Copies of fraudulent documents. The silence became unbearable. Tyler recovered first, laughing nervously. "You're seriously acting like we committed crimes?" "You did commit crimes," I said calmly. My father rubbed his forehead hard. "Emily, this could destroy the family." That sentence actually made me smile. Because for years, protecting the family meant protecting them from consequences. Never me. Never Noah. My mother looked at me carefully. And I think that was the moment she realized she truly lost control over me. Because I wasn't emotional anymore. I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging for understanding. I looked completely calm. That frightened her. "I'm not going to the police," I said quietly. "Not yet." Everyone visibly relaxed too fast. Then I continued. "But if any of you contact Noah again, if you try manipulating him the way you manipulated me, I will." Tyler scoffed immediately. "You're bluffing." Without responding, I picked up my phone and hit play. Daniel's recording from the cafe filled the room instantly. Their voices.
Clear.
Cold.
Cruel.
Megan referring to Noah as the boy. Tyler calling me emotionally unstable. My father discussing ways to separate Daniel from me financially. My mother suggesting Noah was ruining my future. By the time the recording ended, nobody could even look at me. Megan's face was completely white. My father stared at the table. Tyler looked furious, but also terrified. And my mother just looked old suddenly. I leaned forward slowly. "You spent years teaching me I should feel lucky to have you," I said quietly. "But Noah is the only family I'm interested in protecting now." No one interrupted me. For once. "If any of you come near him again before taking accountability for what you've done, you'll regret it."
Silence.
No screaming. No dramatic tears. No fake victim speeches. Just silence. Then one by one, they stood up and walked toward the door. No hugs. No apologies. No goodbyes. Just the sound of the front door closing behind them. 10 minutes later, Daniel came downstairs. He found me sitting alone at the dining table, staring at the untouched food. The folders still scattered everywhere. He sat beside me quietly, didn't ask questions, didn't force conversation. He simply took my hand and squeezed gently. Then he whispered, "That's what taking your power back feels like." And for the first time in my life, I believed him. For 3 weeks after that dinner, nobody contacted me. No dramatic voicemails, no guilt-filled texts, no surprise visits. Just silence again. But this silence felt different. Before, silence from my family always made me anxious. It felt like punishment, like I needed to fix something before things got worse. This time, it felt peaceful. Our house felt lighter without constant tension hanging over everything. Noah laughed more. That was the first thing I noticed. He laughed freely now. Not cautiously. Not while checking adults' faces first to make sure nobody was annoyed by him existing. One afternoon, I found him sprawled across the living room floor, building an enormous Lego spaceship with Daniel. The two of them were arguing over instructions like it was life or death. "You skipped page 14, Noah accused dramatically. Daniel looked offended. "I absolutely did not." "You totally did. I'm the adult here." "No, you're the confused one." Their laughter filled the house so completely that for a second I just stood in the hallway watching them. And suddenly I realized something heartbreaking. Peace was unfamiliar to me. I'd spent so many years surviving emotional chaos that safety almost felt suspicious. That realization stayed with me. Then came the envelope. No return address. Hand-delivered. Daniel found it in the mailbox while bringing groceries inside. The second I saw my mother's handwriting, my stomach tightened automatically. Some habits take longer to break. Inside was a cream-colored invitation card with gold borders.
Elegant.
Carefully chosen. Exactly the kind of thing my mother loved, because appearances mattered more than sincerity. The message was short. "Let's start fresh. Sunday brunch at our house. We miss you. Bring Noah." Not an apology. Not accountability. Just another performance. I actually laughed when I read it. A sharp, disbelieving laugh. Daniel didn't laugh. He leaned against the kitchen counter, watching me carefully. "They're not done," he said quietly. I knew he was right. People like my family never give up control easily. Especially not over someone they spent years manipulating. For a brief second, though, old guilt crept back in. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe. Then I looked into the living room. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, humming softly, while finishing his Lego spaceship. Completely relaxed. Completely safe. He hadn't asked about my family once in weeks. Not once. Children don't miss people who make them feel unwanted. That thought settled everything inside me. I didn't go to brunch. I didn't respond to the invitation either. Instead, I wrote letters. One to my mother. One to my father. One to Megan. One to Tyler. I sat at the dining room table late at night while Daniel slept upstairs beside Noah after the boy had a nightmare about being sent away. Even in sleep, my son still carried scars they created. So I wrote carefully. Not emotionally. Not angrily. Just honestly. I told them I spent years trying to earn their approval. Years believing love was something I had to pay for. I reminded them how every compliment came with conditions attached. How every favor turned into leverage later. How every moment of support was eventually weaponized against me. I wrote that Noah was not a burden, not baggage, not the boy. He was my child, my heart, my responsibility. And anyone incapable of loving him fully had no place in our lives. I told them something else, too. Something I don't think they ever expected to hear from me. You taught me that family means enduring pain quietly. Daniel taught me family protects each other instead. That sentence took me nearly 20 minutes to write because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, from grief. Because part of me still mourned the family I wished they had been. But wishing doesn't make people kinder. I ended the letters simply. The door is closed. Not locked forever, but closed until genuine accountability exists. Then I mailed them the next morning before I could change my mind. Megan texted me 2 weeks later. A massive paragraph. Mom isn't doing well. Dad barely speaks anymore. The family feels broken. You're tearing everyone apart. I stared at the message for almost a full minute. Then I deleted it. Because for the first time, I recognized manipulation immediately. Not concern.
Manipulation.
Tyler took a different approach. He started posting vague things online about loyalty and people forgetting where they came from. I blocked him without hesitation. That felt surprisingly good. Then finally, one last email came from my mother. Only one sentence. So this is really how it ends. I read it once, then deleted it too. Because she still didn't understand. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't living according to fear. I wasn't shrinking myself to make cruel people comfortable. I wasn't sacrificing my son's emotional safety just to maintain fake peace. One evening, a few months later, Noah climbed into my lap while we watched a movie together. He looked up at me seriously and asked, "Do you think Daniel will still love me when I'm older?" The question broke something inside me, because no child asks that unless someone taught them love can disappear. Daniel overheard from the kitchen. He walked into the room immediately and crouched beside us. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." Noah looked up. "I'm your dad every day," Daniel told him. "Not just when it's easy." Noah threw his arms around him so fast, Daniel almost lost balance. I cried quietly after Noah fell asleep that night. Daniel found me sitting alone on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, then shook my head. "Sometimes I still can't believe people can love like this," I admitted. Daniel sat beside me. The porch light reflected softly across his face as he took my hand. "That's because you spent your whole life earning love instead of receiving it." I leaned against him silently while tears slipped down my face. And honestly, that was the real ending to everything. Not the wedding, not the screaming, not the letters. This moment. The moment I finally understood love was never supposed to hurt constantly. My family thought losing them would destroy me. Instead, losing their control saved me. Noah is 11 now. He's louder, happier, more confident. Sometimes I catch him introducing Daniel as his dad without hesitation, and every single time, Daniel smiles like it's the greatest thing he's ever heard. As for my parents and siblings, I don't know much anymore. And that's okay, because blood never made them family. Love did. Protection did. Safety did. And the people who tried to convince my son he was unwanted eventually became exactly what they deserved to become in our lives. Strangers. My name is Freya Collins. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my relationship with Nathan Reed, I believed silence was the price of keeping peace inside his family. I understand now how dangerous that kind of silence can become. Some people think the worst thing a future mother-in-law can do is dislike you. That is not true. The worst thing is when she decides your child is disappointing too. Eleanor Reed never yelled. She never slammed doors or caused scenes in restaurants. People outside the family thought she was elegant, composed, even generous. But Eleanor had perfected something much crueler than screaming. She knew how to humiliate people, quietly enough that everyone else could pretend it never happened. Especially Emily. My daughter was 8 years old then. Quiet, careful, sensitive in ways the world punishes early. She was the kind of child who apologized when someone else bumped into her. The kind who practiced things repeatedly because she was terrified of getting them wrong. Last year, she started taking piano lessons. And somehow, piano became the one place where she looked fearless. Every afternoon followed the same routine. Backpack dropped beside the stairs, shoes kicked off by the couch, then straight to the piano bench with those tiny shoulders pulled tight in concentration. The week everything collapsed started on a Monday. Emily came running into the kitchen, holding her music book against her chest like treasure. "Aunt Vanessa's birthday is Saturday," she told me breathlessly. "I want to play Happy Birthday for her." It sounded simple. But to Emily, it was enormous. For the next 6 days, she practiced nonstop, one hand at a time, counting notes under her breath, restarting every time she made a mistake. Nathan would pause while walking through the living room after work and lean against the doorway, listening. "That sounded better than yesterday," he'd tell her. Emily would smile so fast, it almost hurt to look at. I think Nathan understood her more than anyone else did. Maybe because he recognized that same fear of disappointing people, especially Eleanor. Friday evening, Eleanor called while I was making dinner. The moment I heard her voice, I knew the conversation would leave me exhausted. "We're doing dinner tomorrow for Vanessa," she said. "Try not to arrive late this time." "We'll be there," I answered calmly. There was a short pause before she asked, "What has Emily been doing lately?" "Piano lessons," I said carefully. Another pause. "Well," Eleanor replied smoothly, "let's hope she's improving. Last time she touched a piano, it sounded like random noise." I stared at the cutting board in front of me and said nothing. That was how Eleanor operated. Small wounds. Tiny enough that defending yourself made you sound dramatic. She immediately changed the subject afterward, discussing wine selections for dinner, like she hadn't insulted an 8-year-old child seconds earlier. When I hung up, Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Was that Grandma Eleanor?" "Yes." "Did you tell her about the surprise?" I forced a smile. "No, it'll be better if she hears it tomorrow." Emily nodded excitedly and hurried back toward the piano. The music started again almost immediately. Slow, careful notes drifting through the house, while I stood in the kitchen feeling uneasy, for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Saturday evening, we arrived at Eleanor's house. Everything looked identical to every other family dinner she hosted. Candles placed perfectly, wine glasses aligned precisely, cloth napkins folded like decorations nobody was allowed to touch. Vanessa already had a drink in her hand when we walked in. "There they are," she laughed. Emily clung close to me almost immediately. I could tell she was nervous about the piano waiting in the living room. Dinner started normally enough, or at least what passed for normal in Nathan's family. Eleanor dominated every conversation without raising her voice once. Vanessa laughed too loudly at things that were barely funny. Nathan mostly stayed quiet beside me. Halfway through dinner, Eleanor shifted toward one of her favorite subjects: parenting. "Children need structure," she announced while cutting her steak carefully. "Otherwise, they grow up spoiled." Vanessa smirked into her wine glass. Eleanor glanced toward Emily before looking at me. Some parents confuse hobbies with discipline. I felt Emily staring down at her plate beside me. Nathan shifted slightly in his chair, but he still said nothing. That silence bothered me more than Eleanor's words did. A few minutes later, Emily leaned toward me nervously. "Mom, can I play the song now?" I looked at Nathan. This time, he gave her an encouraging smile immediately. Emily stood carefully and walked toward the piano. Vanessa blinked. "What's happening?" Emily sat on the bench and folded her shaking hands together. I practiced something for your birthday. Vanessa shrugged lightly. Okay. The room grew quiet. Emily placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes came out hesitant and soft, slightly uneven, a little too slow. But she kept going. Happy birthday to you. I could see how hard she was concentrating. Her shoulders barely moved. Her lips silently counted notes between breaths. Then finally, the song ended. The last piano note faded gently through the room. Emily turned around with the smallest hopeful smile I had ever seen, and Eleanor destroyed it instantly. That was painful to listen to. Vanessa laughed directly into her drink. I watched Emily's hands start trembling against the piano keys. And that was the exact moment Nathan finally stood up. At first, nobody reacted. People moved around constantly during Eleanor's dinners, refilling drinks, getting plates, checking phones, but Nathan didn't reach for anything. He looked directly at his mother. The room became strangely still. Emily, he said softly, come sit with me for a minute. Emily slid off the bench quietly and walked back toward the table without looking up. Her eyes already looked glossy. Nathan pulled the chair beside him out gently and rested his hand on her shoulder once she sat down. Eleanor sighed dramatically. Oh, please, she muttered. Don't make this into a scene. If she wants to play piano, she needs to learn criticism. Vanessa snorted again. Nathan still didn't look at either of them. He looked only at Emily. You practiced all week for that song? Emily nodded once. Every day? Another small nod. Nathan smiled softly at her. That's a lot of work. Eleanor rolled her eyes. It's a children's song. That was when Nathan finally turned toward the table. I want everyone to listen carefully for a second. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. What now? Nathan folded his hands slowly on the table. My daughter spent 6 days practicing a song because she wanted to do something kind for Vanessa. Vanessa's smile faded slightly, and the first thing she hears afterward is that it was painful. Eleanor lifted her wine glass. Because it was. Vanessa laughed nervously again. Nathan nodded once. Okay, he said quietly. Then let's talk about painful. The room went silent. Nathan reached into his pocket and placed his phone carefully on the table. For the past few months, he said, I've been keeping track of something. Vanessa frowned. Keeping track of what? Nathan unlocked the screen. Every time Emily leaves this house upset. The room froze. Eleanor's expression hardened immediately. What kind of ridiculous nonsense is this? Nathan scrolled calmly. October 14th. You told her the drawing she made looked messy. Eleanor waved dismissively. It did. November 2nd. You told her she talks too quietly and nobody can understand her. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Nathan kept going. December 11th. You said she was spoiled because Freya lets her choose her own clothes. My chest tightened hearing it all spoken out loud together. January 6th. You told her the cookies she baked were burnt. Emily slowly lifted her eyes toward Nathan. The room had become unbearably quiet. Eleanor's voice sharpened. So what? Children need honesty. Nathan locked his phone and set it down again. Good, he said calmly, because I'm about to be honest too. Vanessa stopped moving entirely. Eleanor stared at him carefully now. What does that mean? Nathan looked directly at her. It means we're finally going to talk about where your money actually comes from. And for the first time that evening, Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. Vanessa slowly lowered her wine glass onto the table. Eleanor stared at Nathan like she had misheard him. What are you talking about? Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gently pulled Emily's chair closer to him. Sweetheart, he said quietly, go sit with your mom for a minute. Emily climbed down from the chair and walked back toward me. She pressed herself against my side, confused and frightened by the tension spreading through the room. Across the table, Eleanor's expression turned dangerously cold. You're embarrassing yourself, she said sharply. Sit down. Nathan remained standing. No. Vanessa forced out a nervous laugh. Seriously, what is this about money? Nathan finally looked at her. You deserve to hear this too. I noticed Eleanor's fingers tightening around her wine glass so hard her knuckles turned pale. Nathan, she warned quietly. But he ignored her. Mom loves reminding everyone how generous she is, he said calmly. The dinners, the house, helping Vanessa with rent, offering money for Emily's school. Vanessa nodded slowly. Because she worked for it. Nathan shook his head once. She hasn't worked in over 12 years. The silence after that sentence felt heavy enough to crush the room. Eleanor slammed her glass onto the table. That's enough. Nathan still didn't flinch. Everything comes from Dad's trust fund. Vanessa frowned immediately. So? The trust has rules, Nathan said. Eleanor's voice dropped lower. You don't know what you're talking about. Nathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. The sound of paper unfolding echoed strangely loudly in the silent dining room. Vanessa leaned forward cautiously. What is that? Nathan placed the documents on the table. Reports from the trustee handling Dad's estate. Eleanor stood so abruptly, her chair scraped against the floor. You had no right. Nathan ignored her again. Vanessa picked up the first page. At first, she looked merely confused. Then her face changed completely. Wait. She turned another page quickly. Wait, what? Eleanor reached for the papers, but Vanessa pulled them back instinctively. Vanessa, give those to me. No. Vanessa looked at Nathan again. This says the trust transfers to you next year. Nathan nodded once. Yes. Vanessa's face went pale. Mom told me she controlled everything. She controls the monthly allowance, Nathan replied evenly. Not the actual estate. Eleanor's voice started trembling slightly now. You went behind my back. Nathan's eyes stayed fixed on her. No, I asked questions. Vanessa kept reading. Then her expression tightened. Why does this say there's a warning notice? Nobody answered immediately. Vanessa flipped another page. Then she froze completely. What does misuse investigation mean? I felt Emily shift nervously beside me. Mom, she whispered, what's happening? I honestly didn't know how to answer her. Because judging by Nathan's face, the worst part still hadn't arrived. Vanessa stared down at the papers again, like they had transformed into something dangerous. Misuse investigation, she repeated quietly. Eleanor reached across the table again. Give me those. Vanessa pulled them back harder this time. No. Nathan finally sat down. Eleanor looked at him like she no longer recognized her own son. You had no right digging into family matters. Nathan folded his hands calmly together. It became my business when you started using money to control people. Vanessa blinked slowly. Control who? Nathan glanced briefly toward Emily. Everyone. Eleanor laughed suddenly, but it sounded thin and forced. This is absurd. Vanessa looked back at the paperwork again. What exactly are they investigating? Nathan leaned back slightly in his chair. The trustee noticed unusual withdrawals about 3 months ago. Eleanor slammed her palm against the table. That money belongs to me. Nathan gave a slow nod. You say that constantly. Vanessa flipped another page. How much money are we talking about? Nathan answered before Eleanor could. Almost $200,000. Vanessa's mouth fell open. 200,000? This conversation is over, Eleanor snapped. But nobody was listening to her anymore. Vanessa scanned the pages frantically. These reports showed transfers. Nathan nodded. Yes. Vanessa read one line aloud. Private consulting payment, $30,000. She looked up. What consulting? Nathan shrugged slightly. That's what the trustee asked, too. Eleanor grabbed her purse from beside the chair. I'm leaving. Nathan didn't stop her. Vanessa kept flipping through the paperwork. There's another transfer here. Nathan waited silently. Vanessa swallowed hard. Real estate deposit, $70,000. Her forehead tightened in confusion. Mom didn't buy property. Nathan looked directly at her. No, she didn't. Vanessa's voice dropped lower. Then where did the money go? Nathan finally spoke the name he had clearly been holding back all evening. It went to someone named Adrian Mercer. The effect on Eleanor was immediate. She froze beside the doorway, like her body had suddenly stopped responding. Vanessa noticed instantly. Who is Adrian Mercer? Eleanor didn't turn around. No one. Vanessa looked back at the documents. This says he's receiving payments every month. Nathan nodded once. Yes. Vanessa slowly lifted her eyes toward her mother. Mom? Eleanor still didn't move. Why are you sending a stranger thousands of dollars from Dad's trust? For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor turned around slowly, and the expression on her face told me something terrifying. Nathan hadn't only exposed the missing money. He had exposed a secret person Eleanor had been hiding for years. Eleanor walked back toward the table, but this time, she no longer looked angry. She looked cornered. Vanessa, she said carefully, give me the papers. Vanessa held them tighter. No, I want answers. Eleanor turned toward Nathan. You're destroying this family over nothing. Nathan stayed calm. Vanessa flipped back through the pages. These payments started 4 years ago. She looked stunned. 4 years, Mom. Eleanor exhaled sharply through her nose. It's complicated. Vanessa laughed once in disbelief. It's literally Dad's money. Nathan leaned slightly forward. The trustee asked the same questions last month. Eleanor's eyes snapped toward him. And what did you tell them? Nathan shook his head. I told them I didn't know who Adrian was. Vanessa frowned. Then how do you know his name? Nathan pointed toward the paperwork. Because the trustee sent notices to the whole family. Vanessa blinked. I never got anything. Nathan's expression darkened. That's because Mom secretly changed the mailing address connected to the trust. Vanessa turned slowly toward Eleanor. You hid it from me? Eleanor finally sat down again, looking exhausted now instead of furious. This is being exaggerated. Vanessa tapped the papers with trembling fingers. Then explain it. For a long moment, Eleanor said absolutely nothing. Emily leaned closer against me quietly. I could tell she understood none of the financial details, but she understood something terrible was happening. Nathan noticed too. Emily, he said softly, why don't you wait in the living room for a little while? Emily nodded silently and disappeared around the corner toward the piano again. Only after she left did Eleanor finally speak. Adrian was helping me with something. Vanessa stared at her. What kind of something? A project. Vanessa looked toward Nathan. Does that sound believable to you? Nathan didn't answer. Vanessa leaned forward. Mom, is he your lawyer? No response. A business partner? Still nothing. Then Vanessa's expression shifted completely. Is he a man you're seeing? Eleanor lifted her head immediately. That is none of your concern. Vanessa froze. You're serious? Nathan spoke quietly for the first time in several seconds. He's 29. The room became completely still. Vanessa blinked twice. 29? Eleanor looked furious now. You investigated him? Nathan shrugged slightly. The trustee did. Vanessa leaned back slowly in disbelief. You've been sending Dad's money to some guy in his 20s? He understands me, Eleanor snapped suddenly. Vanessa stared at her. You met him 4 years ago and started wiring him $30,000 at a time. You don't know anything about him, Eleanor shouted. Nathan nodded once. That's exactly the problem. Vanessa looked between them helplessly. But why is the trust investigating? Nathan took a slow breath. Because Adrian Mercer isn't just taking the money. Vanessa frowned. What does that mean? Nathan looked down at the paperwork. 2 weeks ago, he disappeared. Vanessa's entire posture changed. Disappeared? Nathan nodded. And he didn't disappear alone. Vanessa's voice barely came out. What are you talking about? Nathan glanced briefly toward the living room, where Emily sat quietly at the piano. Then he looked back at Vanessa. The $70,000 deposit? Vanessa swallowed hard. What about it? Nathan answered quietly. It was used to buy a house. Where? Nathan's eyes stayed fixed on hers. 2 streets away from here. A chill spread through the room so suddenly, it almost felt physical. Vanessa pushed her chair back slightly. 2 streets away? Nathan nodded again. The trustee hired an investigator after Adrian stopped responding to calls. I suddenly remembered dozens of strange moments over the years. Eleanor disappearing during dinners, secretive late-night phone calls, sudden mood swings whenever someone asked where she had been. Vanessa whispered, "He was living near us?" Nathan nodded. For years. Eleanor's face looked pale now. He didn't disappear, she muttered quietly. Nathan looked at her carefully. You know where he is? Eleanor hesitated too long. Vanessa leaned forward sharply. Mom! Eleanor rubbed her forehead weakly. He just needed space. Vanessa stared at her in disbelief. You gave him $200,000 and he needed space? Nathan slid another page across the table. The house was purchased under a company name. Vanessa looked down again. Mercer Holdings? Nathan nodded. But here's the strange part. Vanessa looked up slowly. The house is empty now. Eleanor's head snapped upward. What? Nathan pointed toward the final report. The investigator went there 3 days ago. Furniture gone, car gone, everything cleaned out. Vanessa whispered the words like she couldn't believe them herself. He robbed you. Eleanor shook her head immediately. No, Adrian wouldn't do that. Nathan didn't argue. Instead, he quietly delivered the sentence that shattered everything all over again. He didn't leave alone. Vanessa frowned. What does that mean? Nathan turned his phone around on the table. It was security footage from the street outside the house. A moving truck. And a man standing beside it. Vanessa leaned closer. Then all the color drained from her face. That's Caleb. Nathan nodded once. Caleb. Vanessa's boyfriend. The same boyfriend who had stepped outside an hour earlier to take a phone call and still hadn't returned. Vanessa slowly looked toward the front door. Caleb was gone. Nathan's voice stayed calm. The truck left the neighborhood yesterday morning. Vanessa collapsed back into her chair. So my boyfriend and your secret boyfriend stole the money together? Nobody answered. From the living room, piano music quietly drifted into the silence again. Emily had started playing Happy Birthday one more time. Carefully. Slowly. Trying to get every note perfect. Nathan stood up silently and walked toward the sound. And for the first time since I had known Eleanor Reed, she sat speechless at her own dinner table, with absolutely nothing left to say. The days after the dinner felt unreal. Like our entire family had walked out of one life and into another without warning. Nathan barely slept. Vanessa cried constantly. Eleanor stopped answering calls for nearly 2 days after everything exploded. And through all of it, Emily kept asking quiet questions nobody knew how to answer. Did I do something wrong? Every time she asked it, my chest hurt. Because technically, none of this would have happened if she hadn't sat down at that piano bench. But the truth was much uglier than that. The family was already broken, long before Emily played a single note. Her song had simply exposed the cracks everyone else kept pretending not to see. 3 days after the dinner, Nathan sat at our kitchen table surrounded by paperwork from the trust investigation. I woke up around 2 in the morning and found him staring silently at the same page for nearly 10 minutes. You need sleep, I told him softly. Nathan rubbed both hands over his face. I should have stopped this years ago. I leaned against the counter quietly. This isn't your fault. But he shook his head immediately. It is. There was something different about him after that dinner. Something heavier. Like years of pressure had finally cracked open all at once. My entire childhood was like this, he admitted quietly. Mom criticizing everything, controlling everything, making you feel guilty for breathing wrong. I sat beside him. Nathan stared down at the paperwork. When I was little, she'd tell me I embarrassed her in public if I talked too loudly. Then she'd tell me I embarrassed her if I stayed too quiet. He laughed bitterly. You eventually stop knowing who you're supposed to be. Suddenly, Emily made much more sense to me. The fear, the perfectionism, the constant worry about disappointing people. Nathan had grown up carrying the exact same thing, and Eleanor had already started passing it down to another generation. Meanwhile, Vanessa completely unraveled. At first, she refused to believe Caleb knowingly betrayed her. She kept insisting there had to be an explanation. Maybe Adrian manipulated him. Maybe Caleb was helping him accidentally. Maybe he planned to come back. But every day that passed made those excuses sound weaker. Caleb's phone remained disconnected. His apartment was half empty. Even worse, Vanessa eventually discovered Caleb had quietly withdrawn money from their shared account the same week Adrian disappeared. I watched her move through humiliation in slow motion. One afternoon, she showed up unexpectedly at our house, looking exhausted and hollow-eyed. I can't stop replaying everything, she admitted quietly while sitting at our kitchen counter. Every conversation, every lie. Nathan stayed silent beside her. Vanessa looked down at her hands. Do you know what the worst part is? She whispered. I defended Mom my whole life. Nobody answered, because there was nothing comforting to say. 2 days later, Nathan received another call from the trustee. I could tell immediately from his expression the situation had become worse. After he hung up, he stood motionless in the living room for several seconds. What happened? I asked. Nathan looked at me carefully. They think Mom planned to leave with Adrian. I stared at him. What? Nathan slowly sat down. The investigator found records connected to another property purchase. My stomach tightened immediately. Another house? Nathan nodded. She nearly emptied another section of the trust helping him buy it. Everything inside me went cold. She was actually going to leave? Nathan laughed once, without humor. Looks that way. I thought about every lecture Eleanor had ever given us about responsibility, loyalty, family values, all while secretly planning to disappear with a younger man using her late husband's money. Nathan leaned back against the couch heavily. She was waiting until the trust transferred officially to me next year. I frowned. What would that change? She'd lose access to most of the money. The room fell silent. Emily sat nearby, coloring quietly at the coffee table, completely unaware her grandmother had almost abandoned the family entirely. Nathan stared toward her for a long time before speaking again. I spent years thinking keeping peace made me a good son. His voice sounded tired now, but all it really did was protect her. That sentence stayed with me, because it was true. Everyone around Eleanor had spent years adapting themselves to her moods, her criticism, her need for control. Nobody challenged her because it always felt easier not to. Until Emily. Until one little girl practiced a birthday song all week and accidentally forced the truth into the open. Vanessa started visiting more often after that. Not because things were improving, but because she couldn't stand being alone. One evening, she sat curled into the corner of our couch, holding a glass of wine she barely touched. Did Mom ever love any of us normally? She asked suddenly. Nathan looked up slowly. Vanessa laughed bitterly before either of us answered. She only knew how to love people she could control. Nathan didn't disagree. A week later, Eleanor finally called Nathan directly. I could hear her voice through the phone from across the room. This has gone far enough. Nathan remained calm. No, it hasn't. You're humiliating me. Nathan's expression darkened immediately. You humiliated an 8-year-old child because she played piano for you. A long silence followed. Then Eleanor said quietly, I made mistakes. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Mistakes don't last 4 years. After the call ended, he stood motionless beside the window for a while. She still thinks this is about embarrassment, he said eventually, not damage. That was exactly it. Eleanor still cared more about appearances than pain. The following Friday, the investigator uncovered something else. Adrian's vehicle had been found abandoned 2 counties away. No Adrian. No Caleb. Nothing. Vanessa nearly collapsed when Nathan told her. So they're just gone? She whispered. Nathan nodded slowly. The investigator thinks they prepared this for months. Vanessa looked physically sick. All this time, Caleb was sitting beside me, pretending everything was normal. She started crying again, quieter this time. Not dramatic sobbing. The exhausted kind. The kind that comes when humiliation finally settles deep enough to become grief. A few days later, Eleanor showed up at our house unexpectedly. Emily was upstairs practicing piano when the doorbell rang. The moment I opened the door and saw Eleanor standing there, something inside me tightened immediately. She looked older than she had only 2 weeks earlier. Not softer, just worn down. "I need to speak to Nathan," she said. Nathan walked into the hallway seconds later. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Eleanor quietly said, "I loved him." Nathan's face didn't change. "You loved the version of yourself he made you feel like." Eleanor looked wounded by that. "You think this is funny?" "No," Nathan answered calmly. "I think it's tragic." Eleanor's eyes filled slightly. "You don't understand what it feels like to become invisible." Nathan actually laughed at that. A cold, painful laugh. "I spent my entire childhood invisible to you, unless I disappointed you." Eleanor flinched. Upstairs, piano music drifted softly through the ceiling again. Emily practicing scales. Nathan heard it too. And suddenly, his expression changed completely. He looked tired. Not angry anymore. Just tired. "You know what the difference is between you and Emily?" he asked quietly. Eleanor said nothing. She still believes love is something you earn by trying harder. The hallway fell silent. And for the first time since I met Eleanor Reed, she looked genuinely ashamed. But even then, I still couldn't tell whether she felt guilty for hurting people. Or guilty because she finally got caught. 3 days later, the investigator called again. Another development. Adrian and Caleb had likely crossed state lines using fake rental records connected to one of Adrian's shell companies. Nathan hung up the phone and stared blankly ahead for several seconds. "They may never find them," he said quietly. Vanessa covered her mouth with both hands. Eleanor looked completely hollow, sitting across the room. Nobody spoke after that. Because suddenly the betrayal no longer felt temporary. It felt permanent. And somewhere upstairs, Emily continued practicing piano with the careful determination of a child still trying to make something beautiful in the middle of all the damage the adults created around her. The family never truly returned to normal after that. Some damage changes people permanently. Weeks passed, but the tension stayed inside everything, like smoke trapped in walls. Vanessa moved into a small apartment across town because she couldn't stand being inside Eleanor's house anymore. Nathan stopped answering most of his mother's calls. The trust investigation continued quietly in the background, like a storm nobody could escape. And through all of it, Emily kept practicing piano. Sometimes I would stand outside the living room doorway, listening to her replay the same pieces over and over, correcting every tiny mistake before anyone else could hear it. One night, after she finished practicing, she looked up at me carefully. "Does Grandma Eleanor hate me?" The question hit so hard, I physically stopped breathing for a second. "No," I said immediately. But even as the words left my mouth, I hated how uncertain they sounded. Emily looked down at her hands. She always looks disappointed when I talk. I sat beside her on the piano bench. "None of this is your fault." "I know," she whispered. But children always blame themselves a little anyway. Nathan walked into the room just in time to hear the last part of the conversation. I saw something break behind his eyes immediately. After Emily went upstairs that night, he sat beside me silently for a long time. "I'm done," he finally said. "With what?" "With pretending Mom's behavior is normal." There was no anger in his voice anymore. That frightened me more than anger would have. "I spent years trying to manage her emotions," he continued quietly, "but I'm not doing it to Emily." And for the first time since I'd known him, Nathan truly meant it. A few days later, Vanessa received a call from Caleb. The number was blocked. She nearly dropped the phone when she heard his voice. Nathan put the call on speaker while I stood nearby listening. Caleb sounded exhausted. "Vanessa, I'm sorry." Vanessa's face twisted immediately. Where are you? I can't tell you. Nathan's expression hardened. Did you steal the money? There was a long silence. Then Caleb answered quietly. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Vanessa started crying instantly. You disappeared. I know. You left me. Another silence. Then Caleb said something none of us expected. Adrian lied to everybody. Nathan frowned. What does that mean? Caleb exhaled shakily. He told me Eleanor was controlling him. He said he needed help getting away from her. Vanessa stared at the phone in disbelief. You're kidding. I didn't know about most of the money, Caleb insisted. Not at first. Nathan crossed his arms. But you helped him disappear. Yes. Caleb sounded ashamed now. He promised me part of the money if I helped move things out of the house. Vanessa wiped tears from her face angrily. So you betrayed me for money? No, Caleb whispered. I betrayed you because I was stupid. Nobody spoke. Then Caleb delivered the final humiliation. Adrian disappeared on me too. Vanessa blinked. What? He took everything. The cash, the accounts, the fake company records. Caleb's voice cracked slightly. He left me with nothing. Nathan exchanged a look with me across the room. Even Caleb had been manipulated. After the call ended, Vanessa sat motionless on the couch for nearly 5 full minutes. Then she whispered something so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. Mom wasn't the only lonely person he used. That was the terrible truth underneath everything. Adrian Mercer had understood exactly how to study vulnerable people. Eleanor wanted attention. Vanessa wanted stability. Caleb wanted money and escape. And somehow, he gave each of them just enough fantasy to keep them blind. About 2 weeks later, Eleanor invited everyone to dinner again. When Nathan told me, I immediately said no. She wants to fix appearances, I told him, not relationships. I know. Then why go? Nathan looked toward Emily upstairs. Because I want this finished properly. I almost refused. But eventually I agreed, for Emily's sake. The second we walked back into Eleanor's dining room, I felt the difference. Everything still looked polished and elegant. But now the perfection felt desperate. Like a stage set after the audience already learned the truth. Vanessa arrived shortly after us. She looked thinner than before. Quieter. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen carrying plates herself this time, instead of directing everyone from across the room. That alone felt strange enough to unsettle me. Dinner remained painfully awkward for nearly 20 minutes. Nobody knew how to speak normally anymore. Then Eleanor finally looked toward Emily. You've been practicing piano? Emily froze slightly beside me. Nathan answered before she could. Yes. Eleanor nodded once. That's good. No criticism. No hidden insult. Just 2 simple words. And somehow, that almost felt sadder. Halfway through dinner, Emily quietly leaned toward Nathan. Can I play something? The entire table went still. I saw fear flash across Eleanor's face instantly. Fear that this moment might reopen everything all over again. Nathan looked at Emily carefully. You don't have to if you don't want to. Emily hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. I want to. She walked toward the piano carefully, her small shoulders tense beneath the soft yellow dining room light. Before she sat down, Nathan stood and followed her. He knelt beside the piano bench quietly, while Emily looked at the keys. And then he said something I don't think she'll ever forget. You never have to earn love by being perfect. Emily's eyes filled immediately. Nathan smiled gently. You understand me? She nodded. Then she started playing. The song wasn't complicated. It wasn't flawless either. A few notes came slightly too slow. One chord buzzed softly when her finger slipped. But none of that mattered anymore. Because this time, Emily wasn't playing to earn approval. She was simply playing because she loved music. The room stayed completely silent while she finished. No wine glasses moving. No sarcastic comments. No laughter. Just piano music drifting softly through a family, finally forced to sit honestly with itself. When the final note faded, I looked toward Eleanor. Tears were sliding quietly down her face. Not dramatic crying. Not performative. Just silent tears she didn't even seem aware of wiping away. Emily turned nervously toward the table again. And before anyone else could speak, Nathan started clapping softly. Vanessa joined him seconds later. Then I did too. Emily smiled carefully. A real smile this time. Not one begging for approval. Just happiness. And in that moment, I realized something strange. The entire disaster that destroyed Nathan's family had started because one little girl wanted to play Happy Birthday for her aunt. One child. One piano song. And suddenly years of manipulation, loneliness, resentment, betrayal, and hidden shame came pouring into the open, where nobody could hide from it anymore. Sometimes families don't collapse because of one terrible event. Sometimes they collapse because one honest moment finally exposes everything rotten underneath. That night, while driving home, Emily fell asleep in the back seat, with her music book resting against her chest. Nathan reached over quietly and took my hand while the city lights moved across the windshield. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he finally whispered something into the silence. She played beautifully. I looked back at our daughter, sleeping peacefully behind us. And for the first time in weeks, I finally believed our family might survive what his had become. My name is Naomi Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I honestly believed I knew exactly who my family was. I thought I knew which people would protect my daughter when things got difficult. I was wrong. The whole thing started 3 days after my daughter Emma turned 13. I had spent almost 6 months saving for her birthday gift. Extra shifts, canceled lunches, quiet little sacrifices she never noticed. And finally, I bought her the one thing she had wanted all year: a silver iPhone. It was the most expensive gift I had ever purchased for anyone in my life. The moment she opened it, her entire face changed. Not in a spoiled way, not greedy, just shocked, emotional, like she couldn't believe something that beautiful belonged to her. That was Emma, gentle with everything, careful with people's feelings, careful with her belongings too. She cleaned the screen every night before bed, charged it beside her pillow. She even refused to bring it to school the first day because she was terrified somebody might steal it. Which is probably why what happened next hurt her so deeply. My younger sister Vanessa asked Emma if she wanted to spend Saturday afternoon at the mall together. Just a girls' day. Vanessa had always been the fun aunt, loud, charming, impulsive, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and somehow make everyone focus on her within seconds. Emma adored her. I remember watching them leave that afternoon. Vanessa wearing a fitted green jacket and oversized sunglasses, like she was headed somewhere glamorous instead of the local shopping center. At the time, nothing felt strange. They were gone for about 2 hours. When they came back, Vanessa already had the story prepared. Emma had lost the phone. According to Vanessa, they had been near the food court when Emma suddenly realized it was missing. Vanessa claimed they searched everywhere, under tables, inside stores, at the restroom hallway. Gone. But the strange part wasn't even the story itself. It was how fast Vanessa started controlling the situation. Before I could ask Emma more than 2 questions, Vanessa had already called our mother. That same night, my phone started ringing non-stop. My mother, Patricia, immediately focused on the price of the phone, instead of the fact that Emma was crying beside me on the couch. Naomi, why would you buy a 13-year-old something so expensive? Then my father Leonard joined in. Kids who lose things like that don't understand responsibility. I sat there holding my daughter while 4 adults discussed her like she wasn't even in the room. Emma kept whispering the same sentence over and over. I didn't lose it. At first, I thought she meant she didn't mean to lose it. But later, I realized she meant something completely different. Vanessa sat comfortably in our living room that night, acting sympathetic while my parents criticized my parenting. Every few minutes, she'd sigh dramatically and say things like, "I feel terrible for Emma." Looking back now, I think that was the moment something inside me first became suspicious. Because Vanessa never actually looked upset. Nervous, maybe, but not upset. After my parents left, Emma finally told me her version of events. Vanessa asked to borrow the phone while they were walking through the mall. She said she wanted to compare the camera quality because her boyfriend Marcus planned on buying her a new phone eventually. Emma handed it over immediately. Then, Vanessa kept holding it. Emma asked for it back once near a clothing store. Vanessa laughed and told her she still needed to check something on it. Later, near the restroom hallway, Vanessa said she needed to make a quick phone call. She walked away, carrying Emma's phone. A few minutes later, she returned empty-handed. Then suddenly the story became that somebody stole it. "What did Aunt Vanessa say after that?" I asked. Emma looked down at her hands. "She told me not to mention she borrowed it." The room suddenly felt colder. "Why?" Emma shrugged weakly. "She said people would think I gave it away carelessly." That sentence stayed in my head all night. Vanessa had shaped the entire story before Emma even had the chance to speak. And somehow, everybody believed her immediately. For the next 2 days, the story never changed. Emma lost the phone. Vanessa tried to help. I spoiled my daughter. Emma stopped defending herself after a while. That hurt more than anything. Watching a 13-year-old slowly decide there was no point speaking because nobody intended to believe her anyway. Meanwhile, Vanessa suddenly started posting pictures online about an upcoming Chicago trip. New luggage. Airport captions. Cocktails. Money she supposedly didn't have 2 days earlier. That was the detail I couldn't stop thinking about. Vanessa had spent weeks complaining about being broke. Then, suddenly, she had vacation money. On the 3rd day, while Emma was at school, I drove back to the mall, alone. I told myself I was checking the food court again. But honestly, I think part of me already knew. About 2 blocks away from the mall entrance, there was a small pawn shop squeezed between a laundromat and a nail salon. I walked in without any real plan. And then I saw it immediately. Silver case. Small scratch on the bottom corner. Emma's phone. For a second, I honestly couldn't breathe. I asked the employee if I could look at it. He handed it over casually while I turned it in my hands. Same scratch from the day Emma dropped it in our driveway. Same case. Same phone. My stomach dropped so fast, it physically hurt. "When did someone bring this in?" I asked quietly. 2 days ago. 2 days. Exactly when Vanessa claimed Emma lost it. Then I asked the question that changed everything. "Do you keep records of who sold it?" The employee pointed toward a security camera mounted near the ceiling. "Everything's recorded." I remember staring at that camera while something ugly and cold slowly settled in my chest. I explained the situation, told him the phone belonged to my daughter, showed him a birthday picture of Emma holding it while smiling so hard her eyes almost disappeared. The employee looked uncomfortable immediately. A few minutes later, he pulled up the footage. At first, nothing happened. Customers came and went. Then, the timestamp moved forward, and Vanessa walked into the store. I recognized the green jacket instantly. The video showed her walking directly to the counter, like she had done this before. She removed Emma's phone from her purse and placed it onto the glass display without hesitation. No guilt. No uncertainty. The employee inspected it while Vanessa casually scrolled through her own phone. Then he counted cash into her hand. Vanessa took the money and slipped it into her purse. Just like that. Like my daughter's birthday gift meant absolutely nothing. I sat there staring at the screen long after the video ended. The employee finally asked quietly, "That your sister?" I nodded. Then he said something that somehow made everything worse. She seemed desperate for cash. I immediately thought about Chicago, the luggage photos, the vacation captions. My daughter's humiliation had funded Vanessa's trip. I bought the phone back on the spot, the exact amount Vanessa received for selling it. While the employee printed the receipt, I kept replaying the last 2 days in my head. My parents blaming Emma, Patricia criticizing her character, Leonard lecturing her about responsibility, Vanessa sitting there silently while a 13-year-old absorbed all of it. Before I left, the employee asked if I wanted a copy of the surveillance footage. "Yes," I said immediately. He saved it onto a flash drive and handed it to me. I drove home with Emma's phone in one hand and the flash drive in my pocket. The entire drive, one thought repeated in my head over and over. Vanessa didn't just steal the phone. She watched my daughter suffer for it. When I walked into the house, Emma looked up from the couch. Her eyes locked onto the phone instantly. She froze. "Where did you find it?" she whispered. I sat beside her carefully. "In a pawn shop." Her face changed immediately. Confusion first. Then fear. Then something else. Something closer to understanding. I finally asked her one more question. "Did Aunt Vanessa ever give the phone back after borrowing it?" Emma shook her head slowly. "No." Then she looked at me carefully. "Are Grandma and Grandpa still mad at me?" That question broke something inside me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the flash drive, and placed it onto the coffee table between us. "No," I told her quietly. "They won't be mad at you anymore." That night, I called my parents and invited everyone to dinner the following evening. Vanessa answered from the background, asking what was going on. My mother said I had apparently figured out what happened to the phone. Then Vanessa laughed softly and said something that almost made me sick. Well, hopefully Emma learned something from all this. I stared at the flash drive while listening to her voice. Vanessa had absolutely no idea what was waiting for her tomorrow night. And for the first time in my life, I think I understood what real betrayal actually felt like. The next evening, everyone arrived exactly at 6. My parents came first. My father, Leonard, carried a bottle of wine under one arm, like this was some ordinary Sunday dinner, instead of the beginning of a family disaster. My mother, Patricia, walked straight toward Emma and kissed the top of her head, before immediately asking if she had been more careful with her belongings lately. Emma just nodded quietly. That silence bothered me more than if she had argued. 3 days earlier, my daughter would have defended herself immediately. Now, she looked afraid to say the wrong thing around adults. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later, smiling. Perfect makeup, hair curled carefully, expensive perfume floating through the hallway before she even fully entered the house. She carried a small shopping bag and handed Emma a box of chocolates like she was some thoughtful aunt trying to comfort her niece after an unfortunate accident. The performance would have been impressive if I hadn't already seen the pawn shop footage. "Hi, sweetheart," Vanessa said warmly to Emma. Emma forced a small smile, but stayed close beside me. I noticed that immediately, too. Kids know when someone isn't safe long before adults admit it. Dinner started awkwardly. Everybody acted like the situation was already over. My father talked about work. My mother complained about neighbors. Vanessa spent almost 15 minutes describing her upcoming Chicago trip with Marcus in exhausting detail. Apparently, the hotel overlooked the river. Apparently, the flights were already booked. Apparently, Marcus wanted to take her shopping downtown. Every time she spoke about that trip, All I could picture was the pawn shop employee counting bills into her hand. Money earned by selling a 13-year-old girl's birthday present. At one point, Vanessa even laughed and said, "I desperately needed this vacation." I almost laughed myself. The entire dinner felt fake, like everybody was participating in a version of reality Vanessa created and expected the rest of us to follow. Then, eventually, my mother brought the subject back to the phone. Of course she did. She looked directly at Emma while cutting a piece of chicken slowly across her plate. "Well," Patricia sighed, "maybe this whole thing will be a learning experience." Emma lowered her eyes immediately. My chest tightened. My mother continued carefully, like she believed she was offering wisdom instead of humiliation. "When people lose expensive things, they need to understand actions have consequences." Vanessa nodded beside her. "I agree." That was the moment I finally stood up. Nobody spoke while I walked into the living room. I could feel Vanessa watching me. I grabbed Emma's phone from the shelf where I had hidden it earlier and walked back into the dining room, slowly. Then I placed it directly onto the center of the table.
Silence.
Complete silence. My father leaned forward first. "Where did you find that?" My mother stared at the phone in confusion. Vanessa looked like all the blood had suddenly drained from her body. For a second, she honestly looked terrified. "I found it yesterday," I said calmly. My father frowned. "Where?" "In a pawn shop 2 blocks from the mall." Vanessa spoke immediately. "That doesn't mean anything." Too quickly. Too defensive. My mother looked between us uncertainly. Vanessa forced a small laugh. "Somebody probably found it and sold it." I nodded slowly. "That's possible." I watched relief flicker across her face for about half a second. Then I reached beside my chair and lifted my laptop onto the table. "But the pawn shop has security cameras." Everything changed after that sentence. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for food anymore. I plugged the flash drive into the laptop carefully, while Vanessa stared at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Pure panic. "What is this?" she asked quietly. I ignored the question. The video opened. The pawn shop appeared on the screen. Timestamp in the corner. Customers moving in and out. My parents leaned forward automatically. At first, nobody recognized what they were watching. Then, the door opened. Vanessa walked into frame wearing the green jacket from the mall trip. The entire room froze. On screen, Vanessa walked calmly to the counter. She removed Emma's phone from her purse and placed it onto the glass display. The employee inspected it. Then he counted cash into her hand. Vanessa took the money and left. That was it. No dramatic confession. No emotional hesitation. Just quiet betrayal recorded clearly on camera. The video ended. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the faint humming noise from my laptop fan. My father kept staring at the blank screen, like he expected the footage to somehow change if he looked long enough. My mother slowly turned toward Vanessa. Vanessa still hadn't moved. Her face looked almost gray. Finally, she whispered the first thing that entered her mind. "That's not what it looks like." Nobody answered. Then suddenly she started talking too fast. "I found the phone after Emma lost it. I was trying to fix the situation. I just needed money temporarily, and I planned on buying it back later." My father frowned deeply. "You found it where?" Vanessa hesitated. "At the mall." Emma spoke quietly from beside me. "She never gave it back after borrowing it." Vanessa didn't even look at her. That part disgusted me most. Even cornered, she still couldn't face the child she hurt. She kept staring at my parents instead. I panicked. she said weakly. I didn't think it would become this huge thing. I looked directly at her. Then why did you let everyone blame Emma for 2 days? Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. That silence told the truth more clearly than any explanation could have. My mother looked physically sick. For the first time since this started, she finally looked at Emma with genuine guilt instead of criticism. "Oh my God," Patricia whispered. My father leaned back slowly in his chair. "So you sat there," he said carefully, "and watched us accuse a 13-year-old girl of lying?" Vanessa rubbed her forehead nervously. "I didn't know how to stop it after it started." "You could have told the truth," I said. She looked at me desperately now. "Naomi, I was stressed about money." Then she made the mistake that finally pushed my father over the edge. And the Chicago trip was already booked. Leonard slammed his hand against the table, hard enough to shake the dishes. "You sold your niece's birthday present for a vacation?" The entire room went silent again. Vanessa started crying immediately after that. But even then, the tears felt strange to me. Not guilt. Fear. Fear that the image she created for herself was collapsing in front of everyone. My mother finally turned toward Emma completely. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly. Emma nodded once, but didn't say anything. Then my father apologized too, clearing his throat awkwardly, like the words physically hurt him. Vanessa suddenly looked at me again. "Why didn't you call me first?" she demanded. "Why would you show everybody the video like this?" I stared at her in disbelief, because somehow, even now, she still thought she was the victim. "You didn't call anyone when everyone blamed Emma," I answered quietly. Vanessa looked away immediately. After that, dinner completely died. Nobody touched their food anymore. Nobody asked Vanessa about Chicago. Nobody laughed. About 20 minutes later, Vanessa grabbed her purse and left without finishing dinner. The front door closed behind her with a sharp sound that echoed through the entire house. And suddenly, everything felt strangely calm, like a storm had finally passed. My mother stayed behind, helping clear dishes, mostly because I think she was too ashamed to leave immediately. At one point, she quietly admitted something that stayed with me. I should have listened to Emma. Yes, she should have. Later that night, Emma sat curled beside me on the couch, holding her recovered phone carefully in both hands, almost like she still couldn't believe it had come back. "You knew Aunt Vanessa did it?" she asked quietly. "I suspected," I admitted. Emma looked down at the screen for a long moment. Then she whispered something so soft I almost missed it. "I thought maybe nobody believed me because I'm just a kid." That sentence hurt worse than anything Vanessa had done. I pulled her against me and kissed the top of her head while trying not to let my anger show. Because children remember moments like this forever. The adults who protected them, and the adults who didn't. The next morning, around 9, my phone rang. "Vanessa." I honestly expected an apology. Instead, the very first thing she asked was, "Do you still have the video?" And somehow, that made the entire situation even uglier. I stared at my phone for a second after Vanessa asked about the video. Not Emma. Not the theft. Not the lies. The video. Like that was the real problem. "Yes," I answered carefully. "I still have it." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Vanessa lowered her voice. "Have you shown it to anybody else?" I almost laughed. Only Vanessa could sound nervous and controlling at the same time. "Everyone at dinner saw it." Another pause. Then she finally admitted the real reason she was calling. "I need you to delete it." Not "please." Not "I'm sorry." just a demand wrapped in panic. I leaned back against the kitchen counter while Emma ate cereal quietly a few feet away, pretending not to listen. Why? Vanessa hesitated. And right there, I already knew whatever came next would somehow make everything worse. Because people are starting to talk. Of course they were. Families like ours always talked. Vanessa inhaled shakily before continuing. I may have already told some relatives a different version of what happened. I closed my eyes slowly. What version? That you embarrassed me during dinner for no reason, she admitted quickly. I told them you accused me of stealing without proof because you were angry. I actually felt speechless for a moment. Even after being caught on camera, Vanessa still believed she could rewrite reality if she talked fast enough. So what was your long-term plan exactly? I asked quietly. Hope nobody ever mentioned the video? Vanessa ignored that question completely. Naomi, please. If this spreads through the family, it's going to become a huge mess. I looked over at Emma. She was staring silently into her cereal bowl now, pretending none of this involved her. That image alone hardened something inside me. A 13-year-old girl already got dragged into your mess, I said. You let 4 adults blame her for something she didn't do. Vanessa sounded irritated now instead of guilty. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. That sentence finally snapped something in me. Bigger than it needs to be? I repeated. Emma cried herself to sleep because everyone thought she was irresponsible. Vanessa exhaled sharply. I said I panicked. And then you lied again afterward. Silence. Then she tried another angle. I was under pressure financially. Marcus and I already paid deposits for Chicago. I didn't know what else to do. I almost reminded her that stealing from a child wasn't exactly a reasonable budgeting strategy. Instead, I said something colder. You still sound more upset about the trip than what you did to Emma. Vanessa didn't answer that. She just asked one final time if I would delete the footage. No, I said immediately. Then I reminded her of something she clearly hadn't considered. The pawn shop also has a copy. That shut her up completely. A few seconds later, she muttered that she needed time to think and hung up. The conversation left this strange heaviness in my chest. Because I realized something important during that call. Vanessa wasn't sorry. She was scared of consequences. Those are very different things. Later that afternoon, my mother called. Her voice sounded tired. Apparently, Vanessa had spent the morning crying to both of my parents. She says you humiliated her, Patricia said carefully. I nearly laughed again. Did she mention the part where she sold Emma's phone? My mother sighed heavily. She admitted what she did was wrong. Wrong. Such a tiny word for what actually happened. Then Patricia revealed something else. Your father told Vanessa he won't help her financially anymore. That got my attention. My father almost always rescued Vanessa eventually. Always. When she maxed out credit cards in college. When she couldn't pay rent after impulsively quitting jobs. When she borrowed money and forgot to return it. Somehow, Vanessa always escaped consequences because somebody cleaned up the mess behind her. But not this time. He told her if she's willing to sell something belonging to her niece, Patricia continued quietly, then he can't trust her with money anymore. And apparently that upset Vanessa more than losing family trust. Her Chicago trip with Marcus was officially canceled because my parents refused to help cover the remaining expenses. Honestly, that was probably the first real consequence Vanessa had experienced in years. Meanwhile, Emma sat beside me on the couch, reconnecting apps onto her restored phone. Resetting passwords. Reinstalling photos. Fixing the little digital damage left behind by Vanessa's choices. At one point, she looked up at me carefully. Are Grandma and Grandpa still disappointed in me? That question crushed me all over again. Even after the truth came out, part of her still believed she had done something wrong. No, I said firmly. Never you. Emma nodded slowly. But I noticed something afterward. She started double-checking everything. Her backpack. Her charger. Her room door. Small anxious habits she never had before. Like somewhere deep down, she no longer trusted people to tell the truth once something went wrong. That realization filled me with more anger than the theft itself. Over the next few days, the family rumors got worse. One cousin texted me asking if Vanessa and I were fighting over money. An aunt called Patricia, wanting to know why Vanessa was crying nonstop. Clearly, Vanessa had been working overtime trying to reshape the story before the truth reached everybody else. But the strange thing was, I never exposed her myself. I didn't send the video around. I didn't gossip. Whenever relatives asked questions, I simply said, "There's proof of what happened, that's all." And somehow, that answer frightened people more than drama would have. Because calm truth is always more convincing than emotional lies. 3 nights later, my mother came over unexpectedly. Emma was upstairs showering. Patricia stood awkwardly in the kitchen, twisting her purse strap nervously, like she wanted to say something difficult. Finally, she sighed. "You know," she said quietly, "Vanessa's always been good at controlling situations." I leaned against the counter silently. Then my mother admitted something I don't think she had ever fully admitted to herself before. "When you two were younger, I usually believed her first." That sentence explained more than she probably realized. Suddenly, my entire childhood made sense. Vanessa getting away with things. Vanessa crying her way out of trouble. Vanessa twisting stories until people questioned themselves instead of her. Patricia rubbed her forehead tiredly. I think we made excuses for her too often. Yes, they absolutely did. And now Emma had paid the price for it. A few days later, I learned things between Vanessa and Marcus were falling apart too. Apparently, Marcus finally discovered why the Chicago trip got canceled. Vanessa originally told him my parents abandoned her financially. But eventually, the real story surfaced. One of our cousins mentioned the pawn shop incident during a family call. Marcus apparently became furious. Not just because Vanessa stole, because she lied repeatedly afterward. By the end of the week, Vanessa stopped posting online completely. No trip photos. No smiling selfies. Nothing. Then, just when I thought things might finally settle down, I received another unexpected phone call. It was the pawn shop employee. His voice sounded uncomfortable immediately. "Hey," he said carefully, "I thought maybe you should know. Your sister came back here yesterday." My stomach tightened instantly. What did she want? She asked whether anybody else requested copies of the footage. For a moment, I just stood there, silently gripping the phone tighter. The employee continued carefully. She seemed really nervous. After we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about that. Vanessa wasn't worried about Emma. She wasn't worried about trust. She was terrified the truth might spread beyond her control. And for the first time in her life, she couldn't manipulate everyone fast enough to stop it. That was when I finally realized something. The stolen phone had never been the real story. The real story was what happened when someone who controlled family narratives for years finally got caught. After everything settled down, the house became quieter. Not peaceful exactly, just different. Like everybody in the family suddenly understood something uncomfortable about each other and didn't know how to act anymore. My parents started calling Emma more often after the dinner incident. Patricia invited her out for ice cream one weekend. My father brought over books he thought she might like. They both tried carefully rebuilding the warmth they had damaged when they blamed her so quickly. Emma stayed polite, but something had changed in her. I could see it every time they asked questions and she paused before answering. That hesitation broke my heart. Because trust, especially for kids, doesn't disappear loudly. It fades quietly, one careful moment at a time. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life seemed to unravel faster every week. Marcus officially ended things with her after another argument about the phone situation. According to my mother, he told Vanessa he couldn't build a future with someone who lied so naturally. That part clearly devastated her. Then, several relatives slowly distanced themselves too after hearing the full story. Not because she sold the phone. Oddly enough, most people focused more on the fact that she let a child carry the blame afterward. That was the detail nobody could fully excuse. Even Patricia admitted it one evening while helping me fold laundry. The stealing was awful, she said quietly. But watching Emma suffer and saying nothing? I can't understand that. Neither could I. Weeks passed. Life slowly resumed its normal routines. School mornings,
Homework.
laundry piled on the couch. But every now and then, I'd catch Emma checking her phone nervously before leaving a room, and anger would flare inside me all over again. One night while I was cooking dinner, Emma asked me a question completely out of nowhere. Why do adults lie even when kids get hurt? I stopped chopping vegetables immediately, because there really wasn't a simple answer. Finally, I sighed softly. Sometimes people care more about protecting themselves than protecting others. Emma looked down quietly. Even family? That question lingered heavily between us. Yes, I admitted eventually. Even family. She nodded slowly, like she already knew that answer before asking. And honestly, that was the hardest part of this entire situation. Emma had grown up a little too fast because of it. About a month after the dinner disaster, there was another knock on my front door. When I opened it, Vanessa stood there, alone. For a second, I barely recognized her. No perfect makeup. No dramatic energy. No polished confidence. She looked exhausted, like consequences had finally caught up with her in ways manipulation couldn't fix anymore. I just want to talk, she said quietly. Part of me wanted to close the door immediately, but another part of me needed to hear what she would say when there was finally nobody left to perform for. So I let her inside. Emma was upstairs in her room. Vanessa noticed immediately and looked nervous about it. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table in complete silence for almost a minute. Then she finally spoke. I lost Marcus. I didn't answer. My trip's gone. Dad barely talks to me. Mom looks at me differently now. Still, I said nothing. Vanessa swallowed hard. I know everybody hates me. Hate isn't really the word, I said quietly. That seemed to hurt her more than yelling would have. For once, Vanessa didn't try defending herself immediately. Instead, she stared down at her hands. I don't know why I did it, she whispered. That was probably the closest thing to honesty I'd heard from her in weeks. You knew Emma trusted you, I said. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. I know. But you still watched everyone blame her. That sentence landed heavily. Vanessa looked genuinely ashamed, for the first time since all this started. I kept thinking I could fix it before anybody found out, she admitted quietly. Then it just kept getting worse. There it was again. Not malice exactly.
Cowardice. Selfishness.
Panic.
Vanessa finally looked toward the staircase leading upstairs. Can I apologize to her? I hesitated. Not because Emma owed Vanessa forgiveness, but because I wasn't sure Vanessa fully understood what she had actually damaged. Eventually, I nodded. Emma came downstairs slowly a few minutes later. The moment she saw Vanessa sitting at the table, her shoulders stiffened automatically. That reaction alone nearly made me ask Vanessa to leave. Vanessa looked smaller somehow, while facing her niece directly. "I'm sorry, Emma," she said softly. Emma stayed quiet. Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. "You didn't deserve any of this." That was the first genuinely correct thing she had said since the beginning. Emma looked at her carefully for several seconds. Then finally, she nodded once. "Okay." Not warm. Not emotional. Just calm acceptance. And somehow, that felt sadder than anger. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Vanessa stayed another 10 minutes before leaving. No dramatic breakdown. No screaming. Just quiet sadness lingering in the kitchen after the front door closed behind her. That night, after Emma went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, thinking about everything that happened. The stolen phone. The lies. The family dinner. The way everyone chose the easiest explanation instead of the truthful one. And honestly, I realized something uncomfortable too. If I had never found that phone in the pawn shop, Emma probably would have carried that blame forever. That thought haunted me more than Vanessa's betrayal itself. A child almost learned to accept guilt for something she never did simply because adults found the lie more convenient. A few days later, I walked past Emma's bedroom and heard her laughing quietly at something on her phone. Real laughter. Light again. Normal. I stopped outside the doorway for a second, just listening. And in that moment, I finally understood what mattered most. Not exposing Vanessa. Not humiliating her. Not proving myself right. The real victory was making sure my daughter never believed she deserved blame for someone else's cruelty. Sometimes truth arrives slowly, sometimes painfully. But when it finally shows up, it changes every relationship around it. And judging by the silence that still lingered around our family weeks later, this truth changed everything. My name is Luciana Brooks. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as protecting my family. It took one sentence at my dining table to make me realize how wrong I was. Sunday dinners had become a routine over the years. Every week, my older sister Vanessa and her husband Daniel would show up late with their twin boys, Caleb and Mason, storming through my house like a tornado wrapped in designer sneakers and expensive cologne. And every week, my son Ethan would quietly disappear into the background. That was just how the dynamic worked. Ethan was 16, quiet, observant, brilliant in ways people didn't notice unless they actually paid attention. He wasn't loud like his cousins. He didn't dominate conversations or perform for attention. He preferred sketchbooks, headphones, coding tutorials, and long stretches of silence where his mind could wander somewhere safer than most people deserved access to. I used to worry about that silence. Then I realized silence was how Ethan survived rooms full of people who made him feel small. Especially Daniel. Daniel had this polished way of insulting people that made outsiders think he was joking. A smile attached to cruelty. The kind of man who could humiliate someone while holding a wine glass and laughing softly afterward. And Vanessa always followed his lead. That night started normally enough. I cooked too much food like I always did. Ethan helped me set the table while music played quietly from the kitchen speaker. For once, he actually seemed excited. Nervous, too. I noticed it immediately. "What's going on with you?" I asked, while placing roasted potatoes onto a serving tray. Ethan hesitated before giving me this shy little smile. I think the app finally works. I stopped moving. For months, Ethan had been secretly teaching himself programming after school. Every night, I'd hear his keyboard clicking past midnight. He barely talked about it because every time he tried sharing his interests around family, someone found a way to make him feel strange for caring. But that night felt different. He looked proud. And God, I would have done anything to protect that look on his face. Dinner started loud, as usual. Caleb and Mason argued over something stupid, while Vanessa scrolled through her phone half the meal. Daniel talked endlessly about money, clients, investments, people he claimed were beneath him. Ethan barely touched his food. Then, finally, halfway through dinner, he cleared his throat. So, I actually built something. Nobody reacted at first. Ethan opened his tablet carefully and started explaining the app he'd been designing. Something about helping students organize assignments visually. He spoke quietly, stumbling over certain words when everyone looked at him too long. But he kept going. And for the first time in months, I saw confidence trying to fight its way out of him. Then Daniel interrupted. Not casually, not accidentally. He leaned back in his chair, looked directly at me instead of Ethan, and said, "You know, Luciana, your kid really lowers this family's standards sometimes." The room went dead silent. For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard him. Then Vanessa laughed under her breath beside him. Not shocked. Not uncomfortable. Amused. Like Ethan being humiliated was somehow expected. I turned toward my son. I will never forget that moment for the rest of my life. Ethan blinked twice, like his brain needed time to process what had just happened. Then, slowly, he closed his tablet. The excitement drained out of his face so fast it physically hurt to watch. It was like watching someone blow out a candle. My stomach twisted violently. Years of little comments suddenly rushed back into my head all at once. He's too sensitive. Why doesn't he act more confident? Boys his age should be tougher. Maybe sports would fix him. Every single dig, every smug glance, every moment I convinced myself keeping the peace mattered more than confrontation. And suddenly, I saw it clearly. I hadn't been protecting my son. I had been offering him up repeatedly to people who enjoyed making him feel inferior. I stood up slowly. "Ethan," I said quietly, "go upstairs for me." He looked confused, then embarrassed. That almost broke me worse than the insult itself. He nodded once and walked upstairs without saying anything. Nobody moved until his bedroom door closed. Then I looked directly at Daniel. "You'll live without our support from now on." Vanessa rolled her eyes instantly. "What support?" she asked with a laugh. That was the moment I realized they truly had no idea how much of their life depended on me. I reached for my phone calmly. No yelling. No dramatic speech. I simply opened my banking app and turned the screen toward them. At first, Daniel frowned in confusion. Then his expression changed. Recurring monthly transfers to their joint account. Private school tuition payments for Caleb and Mason. SUV loan auto payments. Mortgage assistance transfers. Line after line after line. Vanessa's face lost color first. Daniel just stared. I watched realization hit both of them at the same time, and honestly, that silence felt louder than screaming ever could. "You," Vanessa whispered. I didn't let her finish. One tap. Recurring transfers canceled. Another tap. Tuition payments removed. Another. SUV, autopay disconnected. Daniel finally found his voice. "Luciana, what the hell are you doing?" I looked at him evenly. What you should have expected a long time ago. Vanessa tried laughing again, but it sounded shaky now. You're seriously doing this over one comment? One comment. That phrase settled into me like poison. I looked toward the staircase where Ethan had disappeared. No, I said quietly. I'm doing this because it was never just one comment. Nobody spoke after that. I walked into the kitchen, scraped untouched food into the trash, and threw the cheesecake away without even looking at them. Behind me, I heard Daniel muttering curses under his breath. Vanessa whispered something frantic to him, but neither of them apologized. Not once. They left 10 minutes later without another word. The house became painfully quiet afterward. I found Ethan sitting on his bed, staring at his tablet screen without actually seeing it. I'm sorry, I told him softly. He shrugged, like he didn't know what else to do. It's okay. That answer hurt worse than if he'd cried. Because 16-year-old boys don't say it's okay unless they've already learned nobody plans to defend them. I sat beside him carefully. No, I said, it's not. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan finally asked, very quietly, did he mean it? I felt something crack inside my chest. No, I said immediately. Daniel only attacks people when he feels small himself. Ethan looked down again. But maybe I am weird. You're brilliant, I corrected gently. And they resent anything they don't understand. He didn't answer after that. But when I kissed the top of his head before leaving his room, I realized something terrifying. My son had already started believing the things they said about him, and I was done allowing it. 3 days passed. No calls. No messages. Nothing. I figured Vanessa and Daniel were trying to act unaffected, maybe waiting for me to apologize first, like I always had before. Then, on the 4th day, Vanessa finally texted me. Hey, did you stop the transfers? Something's wrong with the tuition account, too. I stared at the message for nearly a minute before locking my phone without responding. 2 hours later, Daniel called. I ignored it. Then he called again. And again. By the 4th call, I answered. Yes? There was a stunned pause. You're seriously doing this? He snapped. I leaned against the kitchen counter slowly. You insulted my son in my house. Oh my God, Luciana, it was a joke. No, I said coldly. It was honesty. You finally said exactly what you've thought about Ethan for years. You're blowing this out of proportion. I almost laughed. Because people always call it an overreaction once consequences finally arrive. I'm done financing people who disrespect my child, I told him. Daniel's voice hardened instantly. So you're punishing the boys too now? The manipulation came so naturally to him, it was almost impressive. I closed my eyes briefly. If you need help so badly, I said quietly, maybe try lowering your own standards. Then I hung up. The next week, everything started collapsing faster than even I expected. The twin school contacted Vanessa after tuition payments failed. The SUV disappeared from their driveway 3 days later.
Repossessed.
Daniel blamed me for that, too. Apparently, they truly believed I would keep saving them forever, no matter how badly they treated us. What they still didn't understand was this. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger passes. This was something colder, something final. And deep down, I think Daniel sensed it too. After the SUV got repossessed, things shifted fast. Not publicly at first. Vanessa still posted filtered family photos online, pretending everything was normal. Daniel still wore expensive suits he could barely afford anymore. From the outside, they looked polished enough to fool people who didn't know better. But desperation has a smell to it. And once you notice it, you can't ignore it. About a week after the school suspended Caleb and Mason over unpaid tuition, I made another decision. One I should have made years earlier. I called my lawyer. The truth was simple. The house Daniel and Vanessa lived in had always been mine. Years earlier, during a market crash, I'd bought the property as an investment. Daniel and Vanessa were struggling back then, so I let them move in under an informal agreement. Eventually, they were supposed to take over the mortgage payments themselves. They never did. Not once. Every year there was another excuse. Daniel's business needed time. The twins' activities were expensive. Vanessa needed surgery. Money was tight. Meanwhile, they remodeled kitchens, took vacations, leased luxury vehicles, and hosted parties, pretending they had built everything themselves. And I let them. Because they were family. Looking back now, I realize something painful. People who depend on your kindness too long eventually start believing they're entitled to it. My lawyer sent the formal notice that Friday morning. Pay actual market rent or vacate the property.
Legally documented. Official. Final.
Vanessa showed up at my door that same night, alone. I saw her standing outside through the security camera before I even opened the door. Arms folded tightly, mascara slightly smeared. She looked exhausted. For a split second, old instincts almost pulled me backward. She was my sister. We used to share a bedroom growing up. We used to stay awake whispering about our future. There was a time Vanessa braided my hair before school and defended me against bullies. But somewhere along the way, that version of her disappeared. Or maybe I had imagined her entirely. I opened the door halfway. Vanessa forced a weak smile. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite her inside. The night air between us felt cold and awkward. "This whole thing got out of control," she said softly. "Daniel's been under so much stress lately." I stayed quiet. He didn't mean what he said about Ethan. Yes, he did. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "You know how men are when they're pressured." That sentence alone almost made me shut the door. Instead, I watched her carefully, because suddenly I could see every manipulation hidden beneath her tears. The soft voice, the trembling hands, the attempt to make me feel guilty for reacting instead of holding Daniel accountable for causing the damage in the first place. Then she said the one thing that finally killed whatever sympathy I still had left. "We're your family, Luciana. You owe us that much." I actually laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just in disbelief. Because suddenly, everything became crystal clear. For years, Ethan had been treated like he barely counted as family at all. Daniel mocked him openly. Vanessa never defended him. Caleb and Mason copied their parents' behavior because children always do. But now that the money was gone, now suddenly family mattered. I looked directly at Vanessa. "You lost the right to use that word the moment you laughed at my son." Her face tightened instantly. For the first time, the mask slipped. "You're being dramatic. And you're finally dealing with consequences." I shut the door before she could respond. That should have ended things. But pride mixed with panic creates dangerous people. And Daniel and Vanessa were becoming desperate, fast. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from Ethan's school while sitting in my office. The principal asked if I could come in immediately regarding a serious academic concern. My stomach dropped the second I heard the tone in her voice. When I arrived, they showed me the email. Anonymous. Someone accused Ethan of plagiarizing the app he'd been developing. Attached were random code snippets pulled from public online forums, along with a long message claiming Ethan lacked the leadership and moral integrity necessary for genuine innovation. But it wasn't just the accusation itself that made my blood run cold. It was the wording. Whoever wrote it knew Ethan personally. They called him socially stunted, emotionally detached, a fraud hiding behind quiet behavior. Every sentence felt targeted with surgical precision. I sat through the meeting calmly, somehow. Answered questions, explained Ethan's work process, promised cooperation. Then I drove home, with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Ethan was upstairs when I got home. Coding. Still coding despite everything. I stood outside his bedroom for nearly a minute before knocking softly. "They think I cheated, don't they?" he asked immediately, without looking up. That nearly shattered me. "No," I said carefully. "Someone's trying to make them think that." He swallowed hard. "I didn't copy anything." "I know." And I did know. I had watched him build that app piece by piece for months, which meant someone else was lying deliberately. I spent the next 6 hours tracking the email. The sender used a fake Gmail account, but people make mistakes when they panic. The recovery phone number attached to the account belonged to Vanessa. I stared at the screen for a very long time after discovering that. Not angry, not even shocked anymore. Just numb. Because there's something uniquely horrifying about realizing your own sister intentionally tried destroying a child's future. A 16-year-old boy. My son. And over what? Money? Humiliation? Pride? I never called her. Never screamed. Never demanded explanations. I went straight to my lawyer instead. The cease and desist letter went out the following morning.
Defamation, harassment, school interference.
Everything documented officially. One more incident and we would escalate fully into court proceedings. Still, they didn't stop. 2 days later, Ethan came home carrying his tablet with a cracked screen. He tried pretending it didn't matter. "It was an accident," he mumbled. I looked at him carefully. "What happened?" "Mason knocked it out of my hands in the hallway." "Accidentally?" Ethan hesitated too long. That was answer enough. I contacted the school immediately. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in that section of the hallway. No witnesses willing to get involved either. But by then, I already understood what was happening. Daniel and Vanessa weren't trying to reconcile anymore. They wanted punishment. If they were suffering, they needed someone else suffering too. And Ethan had become the easiest target. That night, I started organizing everything. Screenshots, emails, missed payments, legal documents, school reports. Every interaction, every threat, every incident. Because I knew this situation wasn't ending with a heartfelt apology over dinner. This had turned into something uglier. War inside families always is. The formal eviction papers were filed the following week. No warnings this time. Just action. 30 days to vacate the property. Daniel showed up at my office the day after they were served. Security called first, asking if I wanted him removed. I surprised myself by saying, "Send him up." Part of me needed to see what he looked like now. When Daniel walked into my office, I barely recognized him. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt, tie hanging loose. The arrogance that usually filled every room around him suddenly felt thinner somehow.
Fragile.
He didn't sit down, just stood there staring at me. "You're really doing this," he said quietly. I folded my hands calmly. "You tried to destroy Ethan's reputation." "That was Vanessa." The speed with which he threw her under the bus almost made me sick. And your sons broke his tablet. They're kids. And you're adults, I replied sharply. Daniel exhaled hard through his nose. You're going too far over one stupid dinner comment. I looked at him for several seconds. Then I said the thing I should have said years earlier. This didn't start at dinner. Dinner was simply the first time you stopped pretending. Something flickered across his face then. Not guilt.
Recognition.
Because he knew I was right. He started bargaining after that, asking for more time, hinting that he could fix things with Ethan, suggesting we work out a private arrangement. Then finally came the real request. What about the SUV payments? I almost laughed. Even now, with everything collapsing around him, he still cared about appearances. I picked up my office phone slowly. You need to leave. Daniel stared at me another second before realizing I truly meant it. That was the last time I saw him face to face for a long while. 10 days later, my neighbor Janine texted me a photo. A moving truck outside the house. That night, I drove past quietly after dark. Daniel was dragging furniture toward the truck, wearing sweatpants and an old hoodie. Vanessa paced near the driveway, screaming into her phone at someone, while Caleb and Mason sat silently on the curb, surrounded by backpacks. Nobody looked glamorous anymore. Nobody looked superior. By day 24, they were gone. They moved into a small rental across town. The luxury SUV was gone. The private school enrollment collapsed completely. The expensive image they spent years building cracked wide open in public. I assumed things would finally settle after that. Instead, a week later, I got a phone call from Simon, an old mutual friend. And what he told me next stunned even me. Vanessa was filing for divorce. At first, I honestly thought Simon had the story wrong. Vanessa filing for divorce didn't make sense to me. Not because their marriage was healthy. Looking back, I wasn't even sure it had ever been healthy. But Vanessa had spent years building her entire identity around appearances. The perfect husband, the successful family, the expensive lifestyle. The curated social media photos with matching Christmas pajamas and luxury vacations they couldn't actually afford. Divorce would ruin the image. But Simon sounded certain. She's already talking to lawyers, he told me carefully. And she's telling people Daniel destroyed everything. I leaned back slowly in my kitchen chair, while Ethan worked quietly upstairs. What exactly is she saying? Simon hesitated. That Daniel manipulated her financially, that he dragged the family into debt, that he ruined relationships with everyone who tried helping them. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course she was rewriting history. Vanessa had always been talented at that. She could take a cruel moment and reshape it into something where she somehow became the victim. Even as kids, she did it instinctively. If she broke something, suddenly it became someone else's fault for leaving it too close to the edge. But this was different. Because now, she was trying to erase entire years of reality. Simon continued carefully. She also said, Daniel's always been jealous of you. That made me pause. Jealous? She said he couldn't stand that his younger sister was more successful than him. I almost dismissed it immediately. Then I remembered Daniel's face every time someone complimented me in front of him. The jokes. The little comments. The constant need to minimize anything I accomplished. Maybe Vanessa wasn't lying about that part. Still, none of it excused what they did to Ethan. Nothing ever would. The school officially cleared Ethan's plagiarism accusation about a week later. One of his teachers privately told me she never fully believed the email in the first place. She had watched Ethan work on the app from the beginning, seen the sketches, the early coding drafts, the trial and error process. They quietly removed everything from his record. No formal apology. No public correction. Just silence. Ethan pretended that was enough. But I noticed how he still hesitated before speaking in class afterward. How he second-guessed himself more often. How quickly confidence disappears when someone attacks the one thing you're proud of. Some damage doesn't leave visible bruises. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was unraveling faster than anyone realized publicly. That truth reached me through Travis, an old coworker of Daniel's. He contacted me unexpectedly one afternoon, asking if we could talk privately. At first, I assumed he wanted gossip. Instead, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I figured you deserved to know," he said quietly over coffee. "Especially after everything." Then he told me the truth. Daniel hadn't left his firm voluntarily. He'd been fired. Quietly. Months earlier. Apparently, the company discovered irregularities during an internal audit after Daniel resigned suddenly. Small financial manipulations hidden across client accounts and business expenses. Nothing dramatic enough to attract police immediately, but enough to destroy his career. Luxury flight upgrades charged to corporate budgets, unauthorized software expenses, personal purchases buried inside client billing structures. Thousands of dollars over time. Maybe more. I sat frozen, listening to Travis explain everything piece by piece. Suddenly, the desperation made sense. The dependence on my money, the obsession with status, the panic after I cut them off. Daniel had already been drowning before that dinner ever happened. And the cruelest part? Vanessa knew. Travis confirmed it accidentally. "She found out months before things exploded publicly," he said. Everyone around him suspected she knew. I drove home afterward feeling strangely hollow. Vanessa hadn't stood beside Daniel out of loyalty. She'd been preparing her escape route. That's why she turned on him so quickly after the eviction, why she filed first, why she positioned herself as the innocent wife trapped beside a dishonest husband. She wasn't devastated. She was surviving. And honestly, Daniel probably would have done the exact same thing to her. By then, Ethan was slowly becoming himself again. Some evenings, I'd find him sketching at the kitchen counter while coding tutorials played softly nearby. Other nights, he'd cautiously tell me about updates to the app he was rebuilding. Little by little, the light returned to him. But every time I thought things might finally settle down, another rumor reached me. Vanessa telling people I abandoned family over a misunderstanding. Daniel claiming I destroyed his life out of pride. Mutual relatives whispering half-truths because they only heard fragments. Eventually, I realized something important. Silence protects liars. So I stopped staying silent. I spent 2 straight nights organizing everything. Bank transfers, tuition receipts, mortgage records, loan documents, legal notices, screenshots of messages, dates, timelines. Every single fact. No emotional commentary, no dramatic accusations. Just evidence. I printed copies into neat envelopes and anonymously mailed them to relatives, family friends, and a handful of people Daniel had been lying to for years. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because Ethan deserved the truth attached to his name, instead of rumors. A week later, my Aunt Carol called me crying. "I didn't know," she whispered immediately. "Luciana, I didn't know any of this." I stood silently by the kitchen window while rain slid down the glass outside. "I'm sorry," she continued softly, "for what he said about Ethan, for believing their version." One by one, similar conversations followed. People stopped defending Daniel, stopped reposting Vanessa's vague victim posts online, stopped pretending I had acted irrationally. Truth moves slowly, but once it arrives, it changes everything. The strangest part was that none of it made me feel victorious. If anything, I just felt tired. Because no amount of exposure could undo what Ethan experienced, sitting at that dinner table, hearing grown adults mock him. And no apology from relatives would ever fully erase the memory of my son asking me quietly if maybe he really was weird. About a month later, Simon reached out again. This time, his voice sounded different.
Concerned.
"He's not doing well," he said. I already knew who he meant. What happened now? He's living in his car. I stared down at my coffee cup without responding. Simon exhaled heavily. He parks behind an old gym downtown. Mostly keeps to himself. Drinks a lot. Something cold settled in my chest hearing that. Not satisfaction. Just grief for the person Daniel could have been if pride hadn't consumed him completely. "He's still blaming everyone else?" I asked quietly. "Mostly." That sounded about right. Apparently, most people still didn't know the full truth about why Daniel lost his job. Publicly, he framed it as corporate betrayal, stress, family pressure. But privately, everyone close enough understood the reality now. He had built his entire identity on appearing successful while secretly collapsing underneath it all. And when reality finally caught up with him, he lashed out at the easiest target: a 16-year-old boy. One Thursday evening, after hearing another rumor about Vanessa already dating someone new, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table long after Ethan went upstairs. The house felt peaceful again, finally. Safe. But sometimes safety arrives carrying loneliness beside it. I thought about Daniel sleeping in parking lots somewhere. About Vanessa reinventing herself again with someone new. About Caleb and Mason trapped between two broken parents. And strangely enough, the person I kept thinking about most wasn't Vanessa or Daniel. It was Caleb. Because during that dinner, when Daniel insulted Ethan, Caleb had laughed too. Not loudly. Not cruelly like his father. But enough. And for weeks afterward, I kept wondering whether he understood what that moment did to Ethan. Or whether children raised inside cruelty eventually stop recognizing it altogether. I didn't know then that my answer was already on its way to my front door. The knock came on a Thursday evening just after sunset. Not the doorbell. A knock. Soft. Hesitant. I almost ignored it at first. Ethan was upstairs working on a new version of his app while I stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary, warm and familiar in a way that finally felt peaceful again. For months, chaos had followed our family everywhere. Legal paperwork. Rumors. Threats. Humiliation. But lately, things had gone quiet. Not tense quiet. Healing quiet. Then came the knock again. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Caleb stood there, alone. For a second, I barely recognized him. He looked older than 17 suddenly. Taller. Thinner, too. There were dark shadows beneath his eyes that reminded me painfully of Daniel near the end. A backpack hung loosely off one shoulder. No car, no parents, no attitude. Just exhaustion. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then Caleb swallowed hard and said, "Can I talk to you?" I stepped aside silently. He entered the house slowly, like he wasn't sure he deserved to be there anymore. I guided him toward the living room while trying to process the fact that this was the first time any of them had crossed my doorway since everything exploded. Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the couch.
Nervous.
That alone told me how much had changed. I waited quietly. Finally, he spoke. Mom moved us into a townhouse upstate. I nodded once. She already has a new boyfriend, he continued flatly. I think she met him before the divorce even finished. There was no anger in his voice anymore, just disappointment. I sat across from him slowly. And Daniel? Caleb stared down at his hands for several seconds. I haven't really seen him in almost 2 months. Something tightened painfully in my chest hearing that. The last time I did, Caleb hesitated. He looked bad. How bad? Like he stopped caring if he woke up tomorrow. The room fell quiet after that. I thought I would feel vindicated hearing those words. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Because no matter what Daniel had done, watching a human being destroy themselves is never as satisfying as people imagine it'll be. Caleb looked up at me suddenly. I didn't come here for sympathy, he said quickly. I stayed silent. I came because I need to know what's true. That surprised me. Caleb exhaled shakily before continuing. Mom says you destroyed our family because you hate Dad. Dad says you turned everyone against him because you always thought you were better than us. He laughed bitterly under his breath. But none of it makes sense anymore. I leaned back slowly. What do you want to know? All of it. So I told him. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just honestly. I explained the financial support, the mortgage, the tuition payments, the SUV, the fake plagiarism email Vanessa sent to Ethan's school, the broken tablet, the years of insults. Caleb listened without interrupting once. And the entire time, I watched guilt slowly settle, heavier and heavier, across his face. Finally, he whispered, I didn't know about the email. I figured you didn't. But I laughed that night. There it was. The thing sitting between us since the beginning. Caleb rubbed his hands together nervously. I knew Dad was being cruel, he admitted quietly. I didn't say anything. I looked at him carefully. Why? His answer came immediately. Because nobody ever says no to him. That hit harder than I expected. Caleb leaned forward slightly. You know what the weird part is? He asked softly. Dad always talked about you like you were weak. I frowned faintly. He'd make jokes. Say you got lucky in life. Say you were too emotional, too soft. Caleb gave a humorless laugh. But whenever people talked about you, they respected you. The room felt strangely still. He hated that, Caleb admitted. It wasn't even really about money. Dad couldn't stand that people trusted you more than him. Something inside me shifted hearing that. Because suddenly, years of Daniel's behavior finally made emotional sense. Every insult, every competition, every smug comment. He wasn't trying to prove I was beneath him. He was trying to convince himself he wasn't beneath me. Caleb looked toward the staircase. Is Ethan home? Yes. His jaw tightened nervously. I want to apologize. For a moment, I simply stared at him. Because after everything that happened, genuine accountability felt almost shocking. No excuses, no manipulation, no blaming stress or family pressure. Just responsibility. I stood up quietly. When Ethan came downstairs a minute later, surprise flashed across his face immediately. Caleb? Caleb stood too fast, nearly knocking his knee against the coffee table. Neither boy seemed to know where to begin. Then Caleb finally spoke. I'm sorry. Ethan stayed completely still. Caleb swallowed hard. For laughing that night. For not saying anything. For all of it. Silence stretched between them. Then Caleb added softly, You didn't deserve any of it. I watched Ethan carefully. Months ago, those words probably would have made him cry. Now he just looked thoughtful. Older somehow. Finally, Ethan nodded once. It's okay. I almost corrected him automatically again. But this time felt different. Because Ethan wasn't surrendering his feelings to avoid conflict anymore, he was choosing peace for himself. Caleb looked relieved enough to collapse. Then, awkwardly, Ethan asked, "Do you still code at all?" Caleb blinked in surprise. A little. That was all it took. Within minutes, they were sitting in the living room, talking quietly about software updates, school projects, and game development, like none of the adults had poisoned everything around them for the past year. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending not to watch. But honestly, that moment nearly broke me. Because children still know how to rebuild what adults destroy. Caleb stayed for about 2 hours. Long enough for the tension in his shoulders to slowly disappear. Long enough for Ethan to actually laugh once. When Caleb finally stood near the front door getting ready to leave, he hesitated awkwardly. "Would it be okay if I came by sometimes?" I looked at him carefully. This wasn't a manipulative question. It wasn't about money, or appearances, or taking advantage. It was a scared kid asking whether somewhere safe still existed. "Yes," I said gently. "You're welcome here." His eyes watered instantly, though he tried hiding it. "Thanks." After he left, the house became quiet again. But not lonely quiet. Warm, quiet. The kind that settles over a home after something painful finally passes through without destroying everything inside it. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room thinking about everything that happened. Daniel was gone. Vanessa had moved on to a new life already. The family everyone pretended to admire had collapsed completely. And yet, somehow, sitting there listening to Ethan upstairs talking online with Caleb about coding, I realized something important. I hadn't destroyed my family. I protected the part worth saving. For years, I confused sacrifice with love, silence with peace, tolerance with kindness. But protecting your child from people willing to break them, that isn't cruelty. It's responsibility. Daniel once sat in my dining room and said Ethan lowered our family's standards. In the end, Ethan became the only one who never lost his character at all. And maybe that was the real reason Daniel could